Welcome, fellow wanderer of the endless seas, to the extraordinary chronicle of one who would become legend. Tonight, we trace the complete journey of Monkey D, Luffy, from a small boy with impossible dreams to the man who would shake the very foundations of the world. This is a tale of unwavering determination carved into the annals of pirate history, written in the bonds of friendship and the pursuit of ultimate freedom. So settle in. Let the gentle rhythm of ocean waves carry you into peaceful slumber as we explore every triumph, every loss, and every moment that forged the future Pirate King. In the year 1977, on a small island in the East Blue where windmills turned lazily against endless skies, a child was born who would one day shake the very foundations of the world. Monkey D. Luffy entered existence not with the fanfare that might befit a future legend, but with the simple cry of any newborn. In the peaceful village of Fushia, where fishing boats bobbed in gentle harbors and life moved with the rhythm of tides, his earliest years were marked not by prophecy or portent, but by the curious intensity that would define his entire existence. Even as a toddler, Luffy possessed an energy that seemed to burn brighter than other children, a restless spirit that viewed every wall as something to climb, every rule as something to question, every adult warning as an invitation to discover what lay beyond the forbidden. The villagers of Fushia would later remember how he could never sit still, how his laughter echoed through their streets like music, how he befriended every stray dog and spoke to every stranger as if they were old companions. But it was the arrival of his grandfather that would first introduce young Luffy to the harsh realities that lay beyond his island paradise. Vice Admiral Garp came not with toys or gentle bedtime stories, but with a philosophy forged in the crucible of marine service and tempered by decades of witnessing the worst that humanity could offer. To Garp, love was best expressed through strength, kindness through preparation, for a world that would show no mercy to the weak. The training that followed would have broken most children, yet somehow only seemed to forge Luffy's spirit into something more unbreakable. Garp would throw his 4-year-old grandson into the forest and leave him to find his own way home, reasoning that a boy who could survive alone among wild beasts would never be helpless in the world of men. He would tie Luffy to balloons and release him into the sky, teaching him that falling was only failure if you refused to get back up. Most memorably, he would dangle the boy over ravines while lecturing him about the importance of self-reliance, as if the proximity to death might awaken some deeper understanding of life's precious nature. These experiences, which might have traumatized another child into fearful submission, instead seemed to teach Luffy that the world was vast and full of possibilities, that every challenge was simply another adventure waiting to be conquered. Where other children might have learned to fear the unknown, Luffy learned to embrace it. Where others might have developed caution, he developed an absolute faith in his ability to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. It was this fearless curiosity that would lead him to the dock on that fateful morning when the red-haired pirates made landfall in Fushia village. Shanks and his crew represented everything that Luffy had never encountered in his small world. Freedom personified, adventure made manifest, the living embodiment of dreams too large for any single island to contain. They were men who sailed where they pleased, who answered to no authority save their own conscience, who treated the vast ocean not as a barrier, but as a highway to infinite possibility. Young Luffy was immediately captivated by these pirates who seemed to carry the wind itself in their sails. He would spend entire days at Party's bar, listening with wide eyes as they told stories of islands where it snowed upside down, of fish that could fly through clouds, of treasures hidden in places so remote that the maps themselves had been forgotten. But more than their tales, it was their spirit that called to something deep within his soul, the way they laughed at danger, the way they treated friendship as the most sacred bond, the way they never seemed to doubt that tomorrow would bring something wonderful. It was during one of these afternoons, as Luffy pestered Shanks to let him join their crew, that the mountain bandit Higuma arrived with his gang to assert dominance over what he considered his territory. What followed was Luffy's first real lesson in the complex nature of strength and courage. He watched in confusion and growing anger as Higuma poured sake over Shanks's head, mocked him as a coward, and left the bar in triumph, while the red-haired captain simply cleaned up the mess with a smile. To young Luffy, this seemed like the greatest betrayal imaginable. How could someone he admired so much allow himself to be humiliated without fighting back? How could a man who commanded respect on the high seas submit so meekly to a mere mountain bandit? In his child's understanding of the world, strength was simple. You protected what mattered to you. You stood up to bullies. You never backed down from a fight. Shanks's apparent cowardice shattered something fundamental in his worldview, but it was the devil fruit that would truly change everything. The Gomu Gomu no Mi sat innocently in its chest, appearing to all the world like nothing more than an oddly patterned snack. Luffy consumed it without thought or hesitation, as he did most things in those days, acting first and considering consequences only when they became unavoidable. The rubber powers that followed seemed almost like a joke at first, a curious party trick that let him stretch his limbs in amusing ways. Only later would he understand what he had truly given up. The sea, which had always seemed like the gateway to adventure, became his greatest weakness. Water, which covered 7/10 of the world he dreamed of exploring, became a force that could drag him to the depths. In gaining the power to stretch beyond normal human limits, he had accepted limitations that would follow him for the rest of his life. Yet even then, even as Shanks explained what the devil fruit had cost him, Luffy felt no regret. To him, every price was worth paying if it brought him closer to his dreams. The attack by Higuma's gang came without warning, as violence often does in a world where might makes right. Luffy found himself overwhelmed by men who saw his newfound powers as nothing more than an amusing novelty before they got down to the serious business of murder. It was only when the true scope of his helplessness became clear, when the Sea King, Lord of the Coast, emerged from the depths with hunger in its ancient eyes, that Shanks finally revealed the true nature of his strength. The intimidation that Shanks projected in that moment was beyond anything young Luffy had ever witnessed. It was not the crude dominance that Higuma had displayed in the bar, not the simple application of physical force, but something far more profound. A presence that spoke to the deepest instincts of every living creature. The Sea King, a beast that had terrorized these waters for decades, retreated without striking a single blow. Higuma's gang, men who had built their reputation on violence and intimidation, found themselves frozen by fear they could not even begin to understand. But victory came at a price that would haunt Luffy for years to come. Shanks's left arm, sacrificed to save a boy who had been too proud to listen to warnings about the dangers of the world, served as a permanent reminder of the cost of his recklessness. No amount of gratitude could undo what had been lost. No words of appreciation could restore what had been given up for his sake. For the first time in his young life, Luffy understood that his actions had consequences that reached far beyond himself. The departure of the Red Hair Pirates marked the end of Luffy's childhood in ways both obvious and subtle. As their ship prepared to leave Fushia Village forever, Shanks performed one final act that would shape the trajectory of an entire life. The straw hat that he placed on Luffy's head was more than a simple gift. It was a symbol of inherited dreams, a tangible connection to the freedom that called from beyond the horizon, a promise that someday the boy would grow into something worthy of the hopes placed in him. The weight of that hat, both physical and symbolic, would become the foundation upon which Luffy built his understanding of responsibility, friendship, and the true meaning of strength. Shanks had shown him that real power was not about dominating others or proving superiority, but about protecting what mattered most. The red-haired captain's willingness to sacrifice his arm, to endure humiliation, to place a child's safety above his own pride, demonstrated a kind of courage that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with love. In the years that followed, as Luffy grew from a small boy into a young man ready to chase his dreams, he would carry those lessons with him across every ocean and into every battle. The straw hat became more than an accessory. It became a reminder of the promise he had made, the debt he owed, and the standard by which he would measure himself for the rest of his life. Every time he looked in a mirror, every time the wind caught the brim and lifted it from his head, he was reminded that he carried not just his own dreams, but the dreams of a man who had believed in him when he was nothing more than a reckless child with impossible ambitions. The boy who dreamed of freedom had learned his first great lesson about the price that freedom demanded. He had discovered that strength without wisdom was mere destruction, that courage without compassion was simple cruelty, and that the greatest adventures were not about what you could take from the world, but what you were willing to give to it. These truths would guide him through trials yet to come, through battles that would shake the world and losses that would break his heart, through moments of triumph and despair that would forge him into something far greater than even Shanks could have imagined. But for now, he was simply a boy, standing on a dock, watching the ship that carried his first glimpse of true freedom disappear beyond the horizon, clutching a straw hat that held within its woven fibers all the dreams he would spend his lifetime trying to fulfill. The road to Mount Corvo stretched ahead like a sentence of exile, winding through forests that seemed to close in around the small boat, carrying 7-year-old Luffy toward a destiny he could never have imagined. Vice Admiral Garp sat at the helm with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he was solving two problems at once: finding proper supervision for his increasingly uncontrollable grandson, while simultaneously providing the mountain bandits with an additional source of revenue through the boy's care. Curly Dayton received the news of her newest charge with all the enthusiasm of someone being asked to adopt a particularly destructive typhoon. The leader of the Dadan family bandits had built her reputation on a careful balance of criminal activity and self-preservation, avoiding the kind of attention that brought marine warships to her doorstep. The last thing she needed was the grandfather of a vice admiral dropping off his problem child like an unwanted package, complete with threats about what would happen if anything unfortunate befell the boy during his stay. But it was not Luffy who would prove to be Dayton's greatest challenge. That honor belonged to the dark-haired child who already occupied the spare room in her mountain hideout, a boy whose very presence seemed to radiate a cold hostility that had nothing to do with the temperature of their elevated retreat, Portgas D. Ace possessed the kind of anger that burned without fuel, sustaining itself on grievances both real and imagined, feeding on a sense of injustice that seemed to encompass not just his own circumstances but the very fact of his existence. Their first meeting set the tone for months of conflict that would follow. Luffy, with his characteristic inability to read social situations, approached his new housemate with the same open friendliness he showed to everyone, chattering excitedly about his plans to become the Pirate King, and inviting Ace to join him on adventures that existed only in his imagination. Ace responded to this enthusiasm with the kind of calculated cruelty that children master when they feel powerless in every other aspect of their lives. The rejection stung, but not enough to deter Luffy from his chosen course of action. Every morning, as Ace prepared for his mysterious daily expeditions away from the bandit hideout, Luffy would position himself to follow. Every morning, Ace would create increasingly elaborate obstacles designed to shake his persistent shadow. Logs strategically placed across narrow paths, ropes rigged to swing from trees at precisely the right moment to knock an unwary pursuer off balance. Even small avalanches of stones triggered by pressure plates hidden beneath seemingly innocent patches of ground. To Ace, these traps represented a legitimate defense of his privacy, a reasonable response to unwanted intrusion into routines that had nothing to do with the annoying child who had been forced into his life. To Luffy, they represented puzzles to be solved, challenges to be overcome, evidence that Ace was far more interesting than his cold exterior suggested. Where another child might have been discouraged by repeated failure, Luffy found only motivation to try harder. It took weeks of persistent following, countless bruises from triggered traps, and a determination that bordered on the pathological. But eventually Luffy's stubborn pursuit led him to the great secret that Ace had been so carefully guarding. Grey Terminal sprawled before them like a monument to civilization's failures, a vast dumping ground where the refuse of Goa Kingdom accumulated in mountains of discarded dreams. Among the twisted metal and rotting wood, two children had built themselves a kingdom, founded on the simple principle that what others threw away might still hold value to those willing to search for it. The friendship between Ace and Sabo had been forged in the crucible of mutual necessity. Two boys from vastly different backgrounds united by their shared rejection of the worlds that had shaped them. Ace carried the weight of parentage that felt like a curse, the knowledge that his very existence was considered an affront to everything the world claimed to hold sacred. Sabo bore the burden of nobility that felt like a prison, trapped within expectations that demanded he sacrifice everything authentic about himself in service to maintaining appearances. In Grey Terminal, they had found freedom from these constraints, the liberty to be exactly who they chose to be, without reference to family names or inherited obligations. They had established routines of scavenging and survival that provided not just the necessities of life, but the satisfaction of independence, the knowledge that they could take care of themselves without depending on adults whose love came with conditions they were unwilling to meet. Luffy's arrival in their carefully constructed sanctuary represented a threat to everything they had built together. His innocence was dangerous in a place where cynicism provided armor against disappointment. His trust was liability where suspicion meant survival. His dreams were luxury they could not afford in a world that had already taught them the cost of hoping for too much. The logical response was elimination, the removal of a problem before it could grow into something unmanageable. But logic had not accounted for Luffy's absolute inability to recognize when he was unwanted. His constitutional incapacity to understand that some people might not immediately appreciate his company. Even as Ace and Sabo discussed the practicalities of murder with the casual detachment of children planning a game, Luffy continued to chatter about his dreams, his adventures, his unshakable conviction that they were destined to become the best of friends. The intervention of the Blue Jam pirates transformed what might have been a simple disposal of an inconvenient witness into something far more complex. Porkemi's interrogation revealed the first crack in the armor that Ace and Sabo had constructed around their hearts. The moment when their carefully maintained indifference encountered something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about human nature, under torture that would have broken most adults, let alone a child barely old enough to understand the questions being asked. Luffy refused to reveal the location of the treasure that Ace and Sabo had stolen. not because he particularly cared about money or understood the economic implications of their theft, but because he had somehow decided that these two boys were his friends, and friends did not betray each other regardless of the consequences. The beating that followed was systematic and brutal, designed not just to extract information but to break the spirit of a child whose only crime had been following where curiosity led him. Porkemi applied pain with the methodical precision of someone who had learned through experience exactly how much damage a small body could absorb before crossing the line from persuasion into permanent harm. Still, Luffy refused to speak, even as consciousness faded and awareness narrowed to nothing beyond the immediate reality of suffering. It was Ace who broke first, his carefully cultivated indifference crumbling in the face of witnessing innocence destroyed for his sake. The rescue that followed was less about strategy than about rage. The fury of someone discovering that his actions had consequences he had never intended, that his attempts to protect his small world had resulted in pain inflicted on someone who had never wished him anything but good. The fight with Porkemi served as both catharsis and revelation, allowing Ace to channel months of accumulated anger into something constructive while demonstrating to Sabo that their new companion possessed qualities that went far beyond mere persistence. Luffy had endured torture rather than betray people who had shown him nothing but hostility, had maintained loyalty to boys who had plotted his death, had proven that trust could exist without conditions or guarantees of reciprocity. In the aftermath of violence, as they tended to wounds and processed what had transpired, something fundamental shifted in the dynamic between the three children. The barriers that had separated them began to dissolve, replaced by the recognition that they shared something more valuable than any treasure they might steal from the corrupt nobility of Goa Kingdom. They had found in each other the family that biology and circumstance had failed to provide. The adventures that followed took on a different character than the solitary expeditions Ace had previously undertaken, where once he had scavenged alone, driven by necessity and the bitter satisfaction of independence. Now there was joy in discovery, laughter in success, companionship in both triumph and failure. Luffy's enthusiasm proved infectious, his ability to find wonder in the mundane transforming their survival activities into games, their necessary theft into grand adventures worthy of the pirates they all dreamed of becoming. Sabo's revelation about his true identity should have driven wedges between them. The knowledge that one of their number belonged to the very class they had defined themselves in opposition to. Noble blood carried implications that went far beyond mere social status, representing everything they had rejected about the world beyond their makeshift kingdom in Grey Terminal. Yet, somehow the confession only served to strengthen their bond. Proof that the circumstances of birth mattered less than the choices one made in response to those circumstances. The nobles of Goa Kingdom represented everything that was wrong with the world as these three children understood it. They lived in luxury built on the suffering of others, maintained their positions through violence sanctioned by tradition, and justified their cruelty through appeals to order and stability that served only their own interests. Sabo's willingness to abandon such privilege in favor of genuine friendship demonstrated a kind of courage that had nothing to do with facing physical danger and everything to do with choosing authenticity over advantage. It was in this context of shared rejection of false authority that their dreams began to take concrete shape. The idea of becoming pirates was not merely about adventure or treasure, but about creating lives that answered to no authority but their own conscience, that recognized no law but the bonds they chose to forge with others. They would sail beyond the horizon that limited their current world, would discover islands where freedom was not just a dream but a daily reality, would build a crew founded on loyalty rather than fear. The sake ceremony that formalized their brotherhood carried weight that went far beyond childish play acting. In sharing the rice wine that symbolized their commitment to each other, they were creating bonds that they intended to honor regardless of what the future might bring. They were promising to support each other's dreams even when those dreams seemed impossible, to defend each other against enemies they could not yet imagine, to maintain their connection even if the world conspired to separate them. Each brother brought different strengths to their newly formalized alliance. Ace contributed the fierce intensity that came from having been forced to prove himself worthy of existence from his earliest memories, a determination that burned with the heat of righteous anger channeled into constructive purpose. Sabo offered the intelligence and strategic thinking that came from noble education combined with street experience, able to plan complex operations, while understanding both the mindset of their enemies and the resources available to their small band. Luffy provided something that neither of his brothers fully understood at the time, but which would prove to be the most valuable contribution of all: an absolute faith in the rightness of their cause and the inevitability of their tame, ultimate success, where others might have been daunted by the magnitude of their dreams, where cynicism might have suggested that 3 children could never hope to challenge the established order of the world. Luffy maintained an optimism so complete that it became a source of strength for all of them. The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of their young lives, filled with increasingly ambitious adventures that served as both entertainment and training for the greater journeys that lay ahead. They learned to fight not just with fists but with weapons, not just as individuals but as a coordinated team. They developed the skills of navigation, of survival in hostile environments, of reading the intentions of others, and responding appropriately to both friendship and threat. But happiness built on borrowed time carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. Sabo's noble heritage, which had seemed like nothing more than an unfortunate accident of birth, began to reassert itself as his family grew tired of his extended absence from the carefully scripted life they had planned for him. The wealth and status that he had rejected in favor of genuine companionship became weapons in the hands of those who valued control over contentment. The capture orchestrated by Sabo's father represented a betrayal of everything the 3 brothers had built together, a demonstration that the power of established authority could reach even into their carefully protected sanctuary. The Blue Jam pirates, whom they had previously encountered as enemies to be fought and defeated, became instruments of separation, their greed and lack of principle making them perfect tools for those who preferred manipulation to direct confrontation. The choice that Sabo faced was impossible by design, structured to ensure that no matter what decision he made, something precious would be lost. He could maintain his freedom and watch his brothers suffer the consequences of his family's wrath, or he could surrender his autonomy in exchange for their safety, sacrificing his own dreams to preserve their ability to pursue theirs. It was the kind of moral trap that adults excel at constructing when they wish to ensure compliance without appearing overtly tyrannical. Sabo's return to noble society should have felt like victory to parents who had spent years trying to mold him into the shape they desired. Instead, it marked the beginning of a different kind of tragedy, the slow death of a spirit that had tasted freedom and found everything else wanting by comparison: the clothes, the manners, the expectations, the carefully scheduled activities designed to prepare him for a life of inherited privilege. All of it felt like elaborate forms of torture, designed to kill everything authentic about his identity. The fire that consumed Grey Terminal on the night of the Celestial Dragon's visit served multiple purposes for those who ordered its creation. It eliminated an eyesore that embarrassed the kingdom when viewed by visiting nobility. It cleared land that might be developed for more profitable purposes and it provided a dramatic demonstration of what happened to those who existed outside the accepted social order. The fact that children might die in the flames was not a tragic side effect, but part of the intended message. For Luffy and Ace, trapped within the inferno that had once been their kingdom of freedom, the fire represented the first real confrontation with mortality that their young lives had provided. The games they had played, the adventures they had shared, the dreams they had nurtured, all of it seemed suddenly fragile when confronted with the basic reality of burning wood and choking smoke. They were forced to discover reserves of courage and determination they had not known they possessed, to fight for survival with everything they had learned during their months of preparation. The rescue by the Dayton family bandits provided salvation from immediate death, but could not address the deeper wounds that the experience had carved into their souls. They had learned that the world was willing to sacrifice children to maintain the comfort of adults, that justice was nothing more than a word used to justify whatever those in power decided to do, that the freedom they dreamed of would have to be taken by force from those who would never willingly surrender it. The news of Sabo's death arrived like a final blow to dreams that were already staggering under the weight of harsh reality. The boy who had been their brother, their partner in adventure, their fellow dreamer of impossible futures, had been reduced to a casualty report, a statistic in some official record of the violence that accompanied the world noble's visit. His ship had been fired upon for the crime of existing in waters claimed by those who recognized no authority but their own whim. His life ended before he could even begin to chase the dreams they had shared. Luffy's grief was immediate and overwhelming, a display of raw emotion that his brothers had rarely seen from him during their time together. The boy who had maintained optimism through every setback, who had found reasons to smile even in their darkest moments, was reduced to uncontrollable sobbing that seemed to draw up pain from depths he had not known existed. For the first time since they had met him, his faith in the fundamental goodness of the world appeared to waver, challenged by evidence too stark to be dismissed or rationalized. Ace's response was different but no less profound, his anger transforming from the diffuse resentment he had always carried into something focused and burning. The world that had killed Sabo was the same world that considered Ace's very existence an abomination, the same system that would hunt him for the crimes of a father he had never known. The death of his brother crystallized everything he hated about the established order, providing a focal point for rage that had previously lacked direction. The promise that Ace extracted from Luffy, that his brother would never die and leave him alone, carried weight that went far beyond simple reassurance. It was an acknowledgement of how much they meant to each other, a recognition that the loss of Sabo had created wounds that might never fully heal, a commitment to face whatever dangers lay ahead together, rather than risk experiencing such devastation again. The 7 years that followed Sabo's death were marked by intense preparation for the adventures that lay ahead, but also by a subtle shift in the dynamic between the surviving brothers. Where once their training had been motivated by excitement about future possibilities, now it carried undertones of grim determination, the recognition that the world would test them in ways far more severe than any games they might devise for themselves. Ace's departure at 17 marked both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of their shared childhood and the commencement of the individual journeys that would eventually lead them both toward the destinies they had chosen. The goodbye was complicated by their shared understanding that the next time they met, if they met again at all, would be as equals rather than as older and younger brother, each having proven himself worthy of the dreams they had once shared in simpler times. For Luffy, watching Ace's ship disappear beyond the horizon represented his first real confrontation with the loneliness that would become a recurring theme in his life. The boy who had always been surrounded by family, first his grandfather and the villagers of Fushia, then Ace and Sabo and the chaotic warmth of the Dadan family hideout, found himself truly alone for the first time, left with nothing but his memories and the promise he had made to follow in his brother's footsteps when his own time came. The 3 years he spent preparing for his own departure were marked by a kind of focused intensity that surprised everyone who knew him. The carefree child who had once been distracted by every interesting butterfly or unusual cloud became someone capable of sustained effort toward long-term goals, channeling his natural energy into developing the skills he would need to survive in a world that had already demonstrated its willingness to kill children who inconvenienced it. But beneath the surface changes, the fundamental core of who Luffy was remained untouched by tragedy or time. His faith in the power of friendship had been tested but not broken. His conviction that dreams were worth any sacrifice had been challenged but not defeated. His belief that the world could be made better through the application of sufficient determination had been questioned but not abandoned. If anything, the loss of Sabo had only strengthened his resolve to live in a way that would honor the memory of a brother who had died before he could prove that noble birth did not have to mean noble character. When Luffy finally set sail from Fushia village on his 17th birthday, he carried with him not just the dreams that had sustained him through childhood, but the hard-won wisdom that came from understanding the true cost of those dreams. He had learned that freedom was not a gift to be received, but a prize to be claimed, that friendship was not a game to be played, but a sacred trust to be honored, that the world would test every conviction he held with trials designed to break lesser spirits. The straw hat that sat upon his head as he sailed toward his first adventure was more than just Shanks's gift. It had become a symbol of all the promises he had made and all the debts he intended to repay. To Shanks, who had sacrificed his arm for a reckless child's safety. To Ace, who had taught him that family was something you chose rather than something you were born into. To Sabo, whose memory demanded that someone continue fighting for the dreams they had shared in happier times. The boy who had once followed his brothers through Grey Terminal in search of adventure had become a young man ready to forge his own path across oceans vast enough to contain every dream he had ever harbored. The brotherhood that had been forged in childhood would continue to guide him through trials yet to come, a source of strength that no enemy could destroy and no tragedy could diminish. The foundations had been laid for a legend that would reshape the world, built not on individual ambition, but on the unshakable conviction that some bonds transcend even death itself. The morning of May 5th marked not just Luffy's 17th birthday, but the fulfillment of a promise made in childhood tears beside a brother's grave. As dawn painted the harbor of Fushia village in shades of gold and possibility, Monkey D, Luffy stood at the threshold between the life he had known and the adventure that beckoned from beyond the horizon. The small boat that would carry him toward his destiny bobbed gently in the calm waters, as if the sea itself were holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The farewell with Mayor Whoopslap carried the weight of years spent watching a reckless child grow into a young man whose dreams had only grown larger with time. The mayor's warnings about the dangers that awaited beyond their peaceful harbor fell on ears that had heard similar cautions from every adult who had ever cared about Luffy's well-being. But warnings, no matter how well-intentioned, could not compete with the pull of adventure that sang in his blood like a siren's call. The straw hat that had been Shanks's parting gift sat firmly upon his head as he cast off the lines that bound his small vessel to everything familiar and safe. It had become more than an accessory during the years since that red-haired captain had placed it there. It was a talisman, a reminder of promises made and debts owed, a symbol of the dreams that burned within him like an unquenchable flame. Every time the wind caught its brim, every time its shadow fell across his face, he was reminded that he carried not just his own ambitions, but the hopes of everyone who had ever believed in the impossible. The East Blue stretched before him like a canvas, waiting for the first brushstroke of his legend. These were supposedly the weakest waters in all the world, the training ground where aspiring pirates learned their craft before graduating to the more dangerous seas beyond. Yet even here, in what the world dismissed as a backwater, Luffy would discover that danger and wonder existed in equal measure, that every island held stories worth telling and people worth knowing. His first encounter with the wider world came in the form of Alvida, a pirate whose reputation for beauty had been thoroughly corrupted by years of cruelty and indulgence. Her ship represented everything that Luffy instinctively rejected about the romanticized notion of piracy, the exploitation of the weak, the casual violence, the transformation of adventure into mere predation. But it was not Alvida herself who would prove significant to his journey. That honor belonged to the pink-haired boy cowering in her shadow, a child whose dreams had been beaten down, but not quite extinguished. Kobe's story was a cautionary tale about what happened when dreams met reality without sufficient strength to bridge the gap between them. His ambition to join the Marines had been sincere, his desire to make the world a better place genuine, but somewhere along the way he had allowed fear to replace determination, had chosen survival over principle, had accepted servitude as the price of continued existence. In Luffy, he encountered someone who refused to make such compromises, who treated obstacles as temporary inconveniences rather than permanent barriers. The rescue of Kobe was Luffy's first act as a pirate, though he would have rejected such a clinical description of what he considered simply the right thing to do. The rubber powers granted by his devil fruit made Alvida's iron mace ineffective, but it was his absolute conviction in the righteousness of his cause that truly defeated her. She had built her authority on the assumption that might made right, that fear could substitute for respect, that people would always choose safety over dignity. Luffy's very existence challenged every one of these assumptions. The journey to Shellstown provided Luffy with his first real crew member, though the circumstances of their meeting were hardly auspicious. Roronoa Zoro hung crucified in the marine courtyard, not as a criminal being justly punished, but as a victim of institutional corruption, a man whose only crime had been possessing principles that inconvenienced those in power. The sight of such injustice being perpetrated by those sworn to protect the innocent ignited something primal in Luffy's sense of right and wrong. Captain Morgan's tyranny over Shellstown demonstrated how easily authority could become authoritarianism, how quickly protectors could become oppressors when no one possessed the strength or courage to resist their excess. His son Helmeppo embodied the worst aspects of inherited privilege, wielding power he had never earned in service of impulses he had never bothered to examine. Together, they had turned what should have been a sanctuary of justice into a playground for their own sadistic entertainment. Zoro's agreement to join Luffy's crew was born not out of gratitude, but out of recognition. The acknowledgement that here was someone whose strength was matched by his integrity, whose power served something greater than self-interest. The swordsman's dream of becoming the world's greatest had been temporarily derailed by circumstance, but it had not been abandoned. In Luffy, he found not just a captain but a kindred spirit, someone whose impossible ambitions matched his own. The liberation of Shellstown established a pattern that would repeat throughout Luffy's journey, the collision between his uncompromising sense of justice and the corrupt systems that plagued the world. He did not seek out such conflicts deliberately, did not fashion himself as some crusading reformer bent on toppling governments. Yet somehow, wherever he went, his mere presence seemed to expose the rot that festered beneath polished surfaces. his refusal to accept the unacceptable, forcing others to confront truths they had preferred to ignore. Orangetown provided his first real test against a devil fruit user, though Buggy the Clown proved to be more spectacle than substance. The fragmented pirate's ability to separate his body parts should have provided significant tactical advantages, but his fundamental lack of serious purpose undermined whatever threat he might have posed. Buggy treated piracy as performance art, more concerned with creating impressive displays than achieving meaningful objectives. His defeat came not through superior power, but through superior focus. It was in Orangetown that Luffy first encountered Nami, though their initial meeting was characterized more by mutual manipulation than genuine cooperation. The orange-haired navigator possessed skills that Luffy recognized as essential to his dreams of reaching the Grand Line, but she viewed him as nothing more than a convenient tool to be used and discarded when his usefulness had been exhausted. Neither fully understood the other at first meeting, each seeing only the surface traits that served their immediate purposes. The pattern of recruitment that emerged from these early encounters revealed something fundamental about Luffy's approach to building his crew. He was not collecting subordinates or employees, but rather gathering family members, individuals whose dreams complemented his own in ways that created something greater than the sum of its parts. Each person he invited to join him possessed not just skills that would prove useful, but spirits that resonated with his own understanding of what it meant to live authentically. Syrup Village introduced him to Usopp, a storyteller whose lies contained more truth than most people's honest accounts of their lives. The young man's tall tales about pirate adventures and heroic exploits revealed a deep hunger for significance, a desperate desire to transform an ordinary life into something worthy of remembering. His cowardice was real, but so was his loyalty. His fear genuine, but matched by his willingness to overcome it when people he cared about were threatened. The conspiracy, orchestrated by Klahadore, demonstrated how easily evil could hide behind respectability, how thoroughly corruption could infiltrate even the most innocent communities. The man who had spent years masquerading as a loyal butler had been planning the systematic murder of everyone who had shown him kindness, viewing their trust as nothing more than a useful tool in his elaborate scheme for financial gain. His defeat required not just physical strength but moral clarity, the unwavering conviction that some betrayals deserved punishment regardless of how cleverly they had been disguised. The Going Merry represented Luffy's first real home since leaving Fushia Village, a vessel that would carry not just his body across the oceans, but his dreams toward their ultimate destination. Kaya's gift of the ship was more than mere generosity. It was an investment in possibilities, a statement of faith that dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed, deserved the tools necessary for their pursuit. The figurehead that gave the ship its name would become as much a part of the crew as any human member, its cheerful expression a constant reminder that adventure should be approached with joy rather than grim determination. Bharati provided the most complex recruitment challenge yet, introducing Luffy to Sanji, a chef whose culinary skills were matched only by his fierce devotion to the principle that no one should go hungry in a world capable of producing abundance. The floating restaurant served as a sanctuary for those whom the sea had broken, a place where former pirates and displaced wanderers could find both sustenance and purpose in service to something greater than themselves. Sanji's relationship with Zeph revealed depths of loyalty and sacrifice that resonated with Luffy's own understanding of what family truly meant. The old pirate's willingness to consume his own leg, rather than take food from a starving child, demonstrated a kind of selflessness that transcended mere parental obligation. In return, Sanji had dedicated years of his life to repaying a debt that could never truly be settled, surrendering his own dreams in service to the man who had saved not just his life but his soul. The conflict with Don Krieg tested not just Luffy's physical capabilities, but his philosophical foundations. The self-proclaimed strongest pirate in the East Blue represented everything that Luffy rejected about the pursuit of power for its own sake. Krieg's golden armor and overwhelming firepower meant nothing in the face of his fundamental lack of understanding about what strength actually meant. His defeat came not through superior equipment or tactics, but through the application of will so pure that it could not be deterred by any amount of force. The recruitment of Sanji required more than victory in battle. It demanded the breaking of chains forged from gratitude and guilt. The young chef had imprisoned himself within obligations that, while born from genuine love and respect, had become barriers to the fulfillment of his deepest dreams. Only when the other cooks of Baratie made it clear that his departure would honor rather than betray his debt to Zeph could Sanji finally accept Luffy's invitation to join the crew. Arlong Park forced Luffy to confront the complex realities of prejudice and systemic oppression, issues that could not be resolved through simple applications of force. The fishman's hatred of humans was not mere villainy, but the twisted offspring of centuries of genuine injustice, discrimination so pervasive and brutal that it had transformed its victims into mirrors of their oppressors. Arlong's evil lay not in his anger, but in his willingness to perpetuate the cycle of hatred by inflicting on others the same suffering he had endured. Nami's true story revealed the depths of sacrifice she had been willing to make for the sake of people she loved, the way she had allowed herself to be seen as a traitor and a thief rather than reveal the impossible burden she carried. Her dedication to saving Kokoyazi village had required her to suppress every natural impulse toward trust and friendship, to present herself as someone motivated purely by greed, when in reality she was driven by the most selfless kind of love. The destruction of Arlong Park was more than just another victory. It was Luffy's declaration that the past did not have to determine the future, that cycles of hatred could be broken by those with sufficient courage to choose a different path. The tower where Nami had spent 8 years creating maps for her captor's use fell not to superior strength, but to superior purpose. Its collapse symbolizing the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the ongoing story of freedom versus oppression, Loguetown provided a fitting conclusion to Luffy's East Blue adventures, bringing him full circle to the place where the last pirate king had ended his journey and where the next would begin his approach toward the Grand Line. The execution platform where Gold D. Roger had met his end represented both inspiration and warning, proof that even the greatest dreams could be achieved, but also evidence that every triumph carried within it the seeds of its own conclusion. The encounter with Buggy and Alvida at Roger's execution site should have been a moment of mortal danger, yet Luffy faced the prospect of death with the same calm acceptance that had characterized the previous Pirate King's final moments. The smile on his face as the blade descended toward his neck was not bravado, but genuine peace, the expression of someone who had lived authentically and was prepared to die the same way. The lightning bolt that shattered the execution platform and saved his life might have been dismissed as mere coincidence. But to those who understood the deeper currents that moved through the world, it carried implications that reached far beyond simple meteorology. Some forces were too large to be contained by human understanding, some destinies too important to be derailed by the petty schemes of ordinary villains. The encounter with Smoker provided Luffy with his first real taste of the marine power that would pursue him throughout his journey, a glimpse of opponents who could match his strength while opposing his fundamental vision of what the world should become. The captain's Moku Moku no Mi abilities presented challenges that could not be overcome through conventional means, forcing Luffy to confront the reality that the Grand Line would demand growth in ways he had not yet imagined. The mysterious figure who intervened to save him from Smoker's capture remained unnamed, but his presence hinted at larger forces moving behind the scenes, allies whose existence would only be revealed when the time was right for such knowledge. The wind that carried Luffy to safety felt like more than natural phenomenon. It carried the weight of inevitability, the sense that some stories were too important to end before they had truly begun. As the Going Merry carried its crew toward Reverse Mountain and the entrance to the Grand Line, Luffy stood at the bow with his straw hat secured firmly against the wind, surrounded by the people who had chosen to share his impossible dream. Each member of his small crew brought their own ambitions and their own talents, but together they formed something greater than the sum of their individual parts. A family bound not by blood but by shared conviction that the world contained wonders worth discovering and injustices worth fighting. The East Blue stretched behind them like a completed chapter, its lessons learned and its challenges overcome. Ahead lay waters that had swallowed countless dreams, islands where the rules that governed civilized behavior held no sway, enemies whose power dwarfed anything they had yet encountered. But Luffy faced the unknown future with the same unshakable optimism that had carried him through every trial, secure in the knowledge that as long as his crew stood beside him, no obstacle was truly insurmountable. The boy who had dreamed of freedom had become a young man capable of claiming it, not just for himself but for everyone whose path crossed his own. The foundations of legend had been laid in small acts of kindness and decisive moments of courage, in the gradual accumulation of bonds that would prove stronger than any chain the world might try to place upon them. The real adventure was only beginning. The entrance to the Grand Line rose before them like a geological impossibility, a mountain that thrust itself skyward from the very heart of the ocean with such audacious defiance of natural law that it seemed more like the creation of gods than the work of mere tectonic forces. Reverse Mountain stood as the gateway between worlds, the threshold that separated the familiar waters of the East Blue from the legendary sea that had claimed the dreams of countless pirates before them. As the Going Merry approached the base of this magnificent anomaly, Nami's voice carried a mixture of awe and terror that perfectly captured the magnitude of what they were attempting. The currents that would carry them up the mountain's impossible slope were powerful enough to dash ships against the rocky walls if even the slightest navigational error occurred, yet they represented the only path forward for those who dared to chase dreams larger than the world seemed willing to accommodate. The ascent itself was a baptism by velocity and vertigo, the merry riding currents that transformed the ocean into a vertical river, carrying them toward clouds that seemed close enough to touch. Luffy stood at the bow throughout the entire climb, his laughter echoing off the canyon walls like a declaration of joy in the face of danger. For him, this was not a trial to be endured, but an adventure to be savored, each moment of peril transformed into proof that they were finally approaching the realm where impossible things became possible. The summit revealed a sight that would remain etched in their memories for the rest of their lives. The convergence of 4 great currents from 4 different seas, meeting in a collision of waters that had traveled thousands of miles to reach this single point. But it was not the geographical marvel that captured their attention so completely. It was the whale. Laboon floated in the convergence point like a living island, his massive form dwarfing even the largest ships that had ever sailed these waters. Scars covered his ancient hide, testament to decades of self-inflicted wounds that spoke of a pain too deep for human comprehension. The whale's eyes, when they finally focused on the small ship that had invaded his solitary domain, held a sadness so profound that it seemed to encompass all the loneliness that had ever existed in the world. The collision with Laboon's massive form should have meant death for the entire crew, the Going Merry no match for the sheer physical presence of a creature whose body contained enough mass to crush them without effort. Yet somehow they found themselves not destroyed but swallowed, drawn into the whale's stomach through processes that defied both logic and maritime experience. The interior of Laboon proved to be not the digestive chamber they might have expected, but something far stranger. A living ecosystem complete with an ocean, an island, and even a lighthouse. Crocus emerged from his impossible home like a character from one of Usopp's most elaborate tales, an old man who had chosen to spend his final years tending to the wounds of a creature whose heartbreak had become legend among those who knew the true stories of the Grand Line. His explanation of Laboon's history revealed layers of tragedy that spoke to fundamental truths about loyalty, loss, and the prices that love demanded from those brave enough to embrace it. 50 years of waiting had transformed what should have been a temporary separation into a monument to faithfulness that shamed every human example of devotion that had ever been recorded. The Rumbar pirates had promised to return to their massive friend after completing their journey around the Grand Line, a promise made with the casual confidence of those who had never truly confronted the reality of what such a voyage demanded. Their failure to keep that promise had not been born of betrayal or forgetfulness, but of the simple, brutal fact that the Grand Line claimed lives, without regard for the commitments those lives had made. Laboon's attempts to breach Reverse Mountain represented more than mere animal instinct. They were expressions of a hope so pure that it had survived decades of disappointment, a faith so complete that it continued to believe in possibilities that rational observation had long since proved impossible. Each time the whale hurled himself against the red line, he was not just seeking passage to the other side, but declaring his refusal to accept a reality where promises could be broken by forces beyond anyone's control. The battle that erupted between Luffy and Laboon was unlike any conflict the young pirate had yet experienced, not because of its scale or ferocity, but because of its essential nature. This was not a fight between enemies, but a conversation between kindred spirits, each recognizing in the other a stubborn refusal to surrender dreams regardless of how impossible they might seem. Luffy's rubber fists could no more harm Laboon than the whale's massive strength could break Luffy's spirit, leaving them locked in a stalemate that spoke to deeper truths about the nature of determination. The resolution came not through victory, but through understanding. Luffy's recognition that Laboon's pain stemmed not from anger, but from love, and that such love deserved respect rather than conquest. The promise he made to the whale was both humble and audacious. Humble in that it acknowledged the depth of loss that could never be truly healed. Audacious in that it dared to suggest that new relationships could honor old ones without betraying their memory. The crude painting of his Jolly Roger that Luffy left on Laboon's scarred hide served multiple purposes, marking not just a promise to return, but a declaration that some bonds transcended species, that friendship could exist between beings whose lives operated on vastly different scales. The symbol would remain visible for as long as Laboon lived, a reminder that even in the darkest moments of despair, new connections could form to sustain hope until older ones could be renewed. The log pose that Crocus provided represented more than navigational equipment. It was a key to understanding how the Grand Line operated according to rules that existed nowhere else in the world. The magnetic fields that guided their needle defied conventional understanding of how compasses functioned, requiring sailors to surrender their preconceptions about navigation and embrace methods that seemed to border on magic. Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine provided their first glimpse into the complex web of conspiracies that operated throughout the Grand Line, organizations that moved behind the scenes to manipulate events according to agendas that remained hidden from those who believed themselves to be making independent choices. Their presence at Reverse Mountain had been no accident, just as their defeat would prove to be no mere coincidence in the larger patterns that governed their world. Whiskey Peak welcomed them with hospitality so overwhelming that it should have triggered every instinct for suspicion that life on the sea was supposed to cultivate. Yet the celebration that greeted their arrival felt genuine in its enthusiasm. the townspeople's joy at seeing new pirates seemingly authentic in ways that made caution feel like paranoia. Only Zoro's unwavering vigilance prevented what should have been a night of rest from becoming a massacre of the unprepared. The revelation of Whiskey Peak's true nature exposed the first major conspiracy they would encounter in the Grand Line, demonstrating how easily evil could disguise itself as hospitality, how thoroughly corruption could infiltrate even the most welcoming communities. Baroque works represented a new kind of enemy, one that operated through manipulation and misdirection, rather than the straightforward violence they had encountered in the East Blue. The battle that erupted when masks finally fell revealed Zoro's growth during their journey, his evolution from a mere swordsman into something approaching the world's greatest that he aspired to become. His ability to defeat dozens of trained assassins while his captain slept spoke to more than just individual skill. It demonstrated the depth of trust that had developed within their small crew, the confidence each member had in the others to handle threats, regardless of circumstances. The misunderstanding that led to Luffy and Zoro's confrontation illustrated the dangers that arose when crew members acted without full information, the ways that loyalty could become liability when communication broke down. Yet even in conflict, their fundamental respect for each other remained intact, neither allowing anger to poison the bonds they had forged through shared adventure and mutual dependence. Princess Vivi's revelation transformed their understanding of everything they had experienced since entering the Grand Line, recontextualizing random encounters as pieces of a larger puzzle that stretched across nations and involved the fate of millions. Her story spoke to the complex realities of political power in a world where individual strength could shape the destinies of entire kingdoms, where personal ambitions could masquerade as patriotic duty. The commitment to help Vivi represented Luffy's first real encounter with the kinds of moral complexity that defined Grand Line adventures, situations where clear distinctions between right and wrong became blurred by political necessity and competing loyalties. Yet his decision to involve himself in Alabaster's civil war was characteristic in its simplicity. When friends were threatened, when innocent people suffered, when powerful individuals abused their positions, he responded with the same directness he had shown throughout his journey. Little Garden introduced them to Dory and Brogy, giants whose century-long duel had become legend among those who understood that some conflicts transcended rational resolution. Their battle was not about territory or resources, or even pride in any conventional sense, but about something far more fundamental: the absolute commitment to see a promise through to its conclusion, regardless of how long that might take or what it might cost. The Giants' honor code revealed depths of principle that shamed most human examples of integrity, their willingness to continue fighting for a century over what might have seemed a trivial disagreement, demonstrating that some values were worth preserving, regardless of practical considerations. Their friendship, maintained even as they sought to kill each other, illustrated the complex ways that love and violence could coexist in the hearts of those who lived according to codes larger than self-interest. The intervention of Baroque works agents transformed what should have been a fair contest into something tainted by outside manipulation, the kind of dishonorable interference that struck at the very heart of what the Giants represented. Mr. Three's wax powers and Mr. Five's explosive abilities created tactical challenges that required more than straightforward combat to overcome, forcing the Straw Hats to develop new strategies for dealing with Devil Fruit users whose abilities operated outside conventional understanding. The rescue of their friends from Mr. Three's wax prison demonstrated the growth in tactical thinking that their Grand Line experiences were fostering, the evolution from individual fighters into a coordinated team capable of responding to complex threats. Each crew member's contribution to the solution reflected their unique skills, while highlighting the ways those skills complemented each other to create capabilities that none of them possessed alone. Drum Island's winter wasteland provided their first encounter with the kind of environmental extremes that made the Grand Line legendary among sailors, conditions so harsh that survival became the primary concern, regardless of whatever other objectives they might have harbored. The snow-covered landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the castle that crowned the mountain at the island's heart, like some fairy tale illustration come to life. Wapol's tyranny over Drum Island represented a different kind of evil than they had previously encountered. The petty cruelty of someone who possessed power without wisdom, authority without compassion. His Baku Baku no Mi abilities allowed him to consume anything and transform it according to his will, making him a living symbol of the way unchecked power could devour everything around it, while creating nothing of lasting value. The story of Dr. Hiriluk revealed the tragic consequences that could result when good intentions met implacable reality without sufficient power to bridge the gap between them. His dream of healing his country's wounded spirit through the simple beauty of cherry blossoms had been noble in conception but naive in execution, leading to sacrifice that achieved nothing beyond inspiring others to carry forward work he could not complete. Chopper's transformation from monster to crew member represented one of Luffy's most significant victories, not over external enemies, but over the prejudices and fears that could poison relationships between different species. The young reindeer's medical knowledge would prove invaluable in adventures to come, but more important was the example his recruitment provided. Proof that family was defined by choice rather than biology, by loyalty rather than similarity. The climb up Drum Rockies with Nami and Sanji unconscious on his back became one of Luffy's most powerful demonstrations of the strength that came from protecting others, his willingness to push beyond normal human limitations when people he cared about were in danger. The Lapan that eventually aided his ascent recognized something in his determination that transcended species barriers, a purity of purpose that commanded respect even from creatures that had no reason to trust humans. Dr. Correa's medicine proved capable of healing more than just physical ailments. Her abrasive exterior concealing wisdom accumulated through decades of treating patients who brought her not just injuries, but the stories of how those injuries had been acquired. Her relationship with Chopper demonstrated the complex ways that love could express itself through apparent harshness, the difficult truth that sometimes caring meant forcing others to confront realities they preferred to avoid. Wapol's final defeat atop his own castle represented more than just another victory over tyranny. It was a declaration that the kind of selfish leadership he represented had no place in a world where people like Dr. Hiriluk were willing to sacrifice everything for ideals larger than themselves. The pink snow that fell as they departed Drum Island served as both memorial and promise, honoring the past while pointing toward possibilities that remained to be realized. The addition of Chopper to their crew brought their number to 5, still far short of the 10 members Luffy had originally envisioned, but representing significant progress toward his goal of assembling a crew capable of conquering the Grand Line. More importantly, each new member had brought not just skills but perspective, broadening their understanding of what it meant to pursue dreams in a world that often seemed designed to crush them. As they sailed away from Drum Island, toward whatever challenges awaited them in Alabasta, Luffy could look back on their Grand Line adventures with satisfaction at how much they had already accomplished. They had made friends with a whale whose loneliness spanned decades, had earned the respect of giants whose honor had sustained them through a century of combat, had recruited a doctor whose healing abilities were matched only by his loyalty to those who accepted him as family. But these early victories were merely preparation for the trials that lay ahead, tests that would challenge not just their individual abilities, but the bonds that held them together as a crew. The Grand Line had welcomed them with wonders and dangers in equal measure, demonstrating both why so many dreamers were drawn to its waters and why so few ever completed the journey they had begun with such confidence. The horizon beckoned with promises of adventures yet to come, islands whose secrets remained hidden, enemies whose power had yet to be tested against their growing strength. They sailed forward not just as pirates seeking treasure, but as a family bound by shared dreams, ready to face whatever challenges the legendary sea might place before them. The Grand Line had accepted them as worthy contenders in the greatest game ever played, and they intended to prove that acceptance had not been misplaced. The arrival at Water 7 should have been a moment of triumph, their ship finally reaching the legendary city of shipwrights after successfully navigating the treacherous waters that had claimed so many vessels before them. Instead, the Going Merry's condition cast a shadow over what should have been celebration, her hull groaning with each wave that struck her sides, her masts straining under pressures that once would have been effortless to bear. The ship that had carried them faithfully across the East Blue and through their early Grand Line adventures was dying, and everyone aboard could feel her pain as surely as if it were their own. The diagnosis delivered by Kaku struck Luffy like a physical blow. The Galila shipwright's professional assessment, cutting through any hope that routine repairs might suffice to restore their beloved vessel. The Going Merry had suffered damage that went beyond superficial wear, structural failures that threatened her very integrity as a seaworthy craft. The keel itself was compromised, that crucial spine upon which everything else depended, leaving them with a ship that might sink at any moment, regardless of the weather conditions or the skill of her navigator. For Luffy, the prospect of abandoning the Merry represented more than a mere change of transportation. It felt like betrayal of a friend who had never failed them, whose cheerful figurehead had smiled through every storm and celebrated every victory alongside the crew she had carried. The ship had been Kaya's gift, a tangible expression of faith in their dreams, but more than that, she had become a member of their family in ways that transcended her status as an inanimate object. The conflict with Usopp over the Merry's fate exposed fault lines in their crew that none of them had wanted to acknowledge, the ways that different perspectives on loyalty and responsibility could drive wedges between people who loved each other deeply. Usopp saw in the ship's abandonment a preview of his own eventual disposal, his fears about his relative weakness within the crew manifesting as desperate attachment to the one member who might be considered more expendable than himself. The duel that followed was perhaps the most painful battle Luffy had ever fought, not because of any physical danger it presented, but because of what it represented. The first time he had been forced to take up arms against someone he considered family. Every blow he struck felt like a betrayal of the bonds they had forged. Every moment of the fight a testament to his failure as a captain to find solutions that preserved both safety and unity. Usopp's defeat was inevitable from the moment their fight began. But his courage in challenging someone he knew to be stronger spoke to the depths of his desperation and the sincerity of his convictions. The tears that fell as he acknowledged his loss were not just grief for the Going Merry, but recognition that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired, that some wounds would leave scars regardless of how completely they might eventually heal. The recruitment of Frankie began not with invitation but with investigation. The cyborg shipwright initially appearing as just another obstacle to overcome rather than a potential crew member. His attack on their ship and his role in Usopp's humiliation marked him as an enemy, yet something in his craftsmanship and his obvious love for the vessels he created suggested depths that went beyond simple antagonism. The revelation of Robin's apparent betrayal struck the crew like lightning from a clear sky, transforming someone they had come to trust into a figure whose very presence called their judgment into question. Her calm announcement that she was leaving them forever, that she had been using them from the beginning, seemed to make a mockery of everything they thought they had learned about reading people's hearts and understanding their motivations. The truth behind Robin's actions, when it finally emerged, revealed the crushing weight of government persecution that had shaped her entire existence. The O'Hara incident had marked her as a criminal before she was old enough to understand what knowledge could be dangerous, had forced her to live as a fugitive whose very survival depended on her ability to disappear whenever those who sheltered her faced consequences for their compassion. CP9's involvement in the conspiracy demonstrated the reach and ruthlessness of the world government's intelligence apparatus, their willingness to sacrifice entire cities if doing so served their larger strategic objectives. Rob Lucci and his associates had spent years building false identities, creating relationships that felt genuine while serving purposes that were anything but, proving that deception could become so complete that even the deceivers might momentarily forget their true nature. The journey to Eni's lobby was more than a rescue mission. It was a declaration of war against the most powerful organization in the world, a statement that some bonds were worth defending, regardless of the consequences such defense might bring. The fortress that guarded the gates of justice had never fallen to external attack, its reputation built on centuries of successful deterrence against pirates who might otherwise challenge the government's authority. The battle that followed tested every skill they had developed, every bond they had forged, every conviction they held about the power of friendship to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Each member of the crew faced opponents who pushed them beyond their previous limitations, forcing growth that could only come through confrontation with forces that threatened everything they valued most. Luffy's fight with Rob Lucci represented more than just another victory over a powerful enemy. It was proof that his commitment to protecting his crew could generate strength that transcended normal human limitations. The gear techniques he developed during their battle were born from desperation but refined through determination, physical manifestations of his willingness to sacrifice his own well-being for the sake of those who had chosen to follow him. The destruction of the Robin's handcuffs became a symbol of liberation that extended far beyond one person's freedom, representing the crew's collective refusal to accept that anyone's past could be used as chains to bind their future. The sea stone shackles that fell away were not just restraints on Robin's devil fruit powers, but representations of all the ways the world tried to convince people that they deserved whatever punishment had been assigned to them. Robin's declaration that she wanted to live echoed across Eni's lobby like a battle cry, transforming what had been a rescue mission into something approaching a revolution. Her words carried the weight of 20 years spent believing that survival was the best she could hope for, that happiness was a luxury too dangerous to pursue, that accepting solitude was preferable to risking the pain that came with connection. The fall of Eni's lobby sent shockwaves throughout the world that went far beyond the immediate tactical consequences of the fortress's destruction. For the first time in centuries, pirates had successfully challenged the world government's most secure installation and emerged victorious, proving that the system's claims of invincibility were based more on reputation than reality. The Going Mary's final voyage to rescue her crew was perhaps her greatest moment, the dying ship finding strength she should not have possessed to reach friends who needed her one last time. Her appearance in the nick of time felt like a miracle to those who witnessed it, though those who understood the deeper connections between people and the vessels that carried them recognized it as something far more profound, love expressing itself through sacrifice. The funeral that followed their escape from Eni's lobby was unlike any ceremony Luffy had ever participated in, the formal acknowledgement that something cherished had ended, that gratitude was owed for service that could never be adequately repaid. The tears that fell as the Going Merry's spirit spoke to them one final time were not just grief, but recognition that some relationships transcended the boundaries between living and inanimate, between human and object. Frankie's offer to build them a new ship came at exactly the moment when such generosity was most needed. His skills and materials combining to create something that honored the memory of what they had lost, while providing capabilities that exceeded anything they had previously possessed. The Thousand Sunny represented not just replacement but evolution, a vessel designed specifically for their needs and dreams. The recruitment of Frankie himself required more persuasion than invitation. The cyborg's attachment to Water 7 and his responsibilities there creating obstacles that had nothing to do with unwillingness to join their adventures. His eventual agreement came only after his surrogate family made it clear that his departure would honor rather than betray the relationships that had shaped him. Brooks' addition to their crew began with mystery and proceeded through revelation, the living skeleton's appearance raising questions about the nature of death and resurrection that none of them had expected to confront. His devil fruit power had granted him a second chance at existence, but that gift had come with loneliness so profound that it had nearly driven him mad during the decades he had spent in isolation. The musician they had searched for since their journey began proved to possess not just the skills they needed, but connections to their past that seemed too coincidental to be mere chance. His relationship with Laboon transformed their promise to the whale from abstract commitment to personal mission, adding urgency to their eventual return to Reverse Mountain that went beyond simple obligation. Thriller Bark tested their courage against fears both supernatural and psychological, forcing them to confront enemies whose power derived not from physical strength but from manipulation of terror itself. Gecko Moria's ability to steal shadows represented a unique threat, the loss of reflection serving as metaphor for the ways that defeat could rob people of their very identity. The zombies that populated the floating fortress were more tragic than terrifying, victims of Moria's ambition rather than willing participants in his schemes. Their eventual liberation came not through destruction but through restoration, the return of shadows, allowing them to reclaim lives that had been stolen rather than simply ended. Luffy's encounter with his own zombie revealed the disturbing implications of Moria's power, the ways that stolen shadows could be used to animate corpses in mockeries of the people they had once been. The fight that followed was as much psychological as physical, a battle against a dark reflection of himself that possessed his abilities without his heart. The intervention of Bartholomew Kuma introduced them to power on a scale they had never encountered, a warlord whose abilities seemed to operate according to rules that defied conventional understanding. His decision to spare their lives came at a cost that none of them initially understood. Zoro's sacrifice, hidden from his captain, to preserve both his pride and his crew's peace of mind. The revelation of what Zoro had endured came only through careful observation and deduction, the signs of suffering he tried to hide speaking to depths of loyalty that went beyond anything they had previously witnessed. His willingness to accept Luffy's pain as his own demonstrated the evolution of their bond from mere alliance to something approaching identity fusion. The departure from Thriller Bark marked the end of their East Blue innocence, the final transition from promising rookies to genuine threats that the world government would be forced to acknowledge. Their bounties reflected not just their individual accomplishments, but their collective potential, the recognition that they had become something greater than the sum of their parts. As they sailed toward their next adventure, Luffy could reflect on how much they had grown since their first tentative steps onto the Grand Line. They had faced enemies who challenged not just their strength but their convictions, had overcome obstacles that tested not just their individual abilities but their bonds as a crew, had proven that some values were worth defending, regardless of the odds arrayed against them. The trials ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine, forcing growth that would transform them from talented individuals into something approaching a force of nature. But the foundations had been laid through shared suffering and mutual sacrifice, bonds forged in the fires of adversity that would prove strong enough to support whatever weight the future might place upon them. The world had taken notice of their potential, marking them as threats to be eliminated rather than curiosities to be ignored. The attention they had earned would bring dangers that went beyond anything they had previously faced. But it would also bring opportunities to make differences that extended far beyond their own dreams and ambitions. They sailed forward not just as pirates seeking adventure, but as a family committed to protecting each other against whatever forces might try to tear them apart. The lessons of Water 7 had taught them that some bonds were worth fighting for regardless of the cost, that some promises were worth keeping regardless of the sacrifice required. The future beckoned with challenges that would test every conviction they held, but they faced it together, united by experiences that had proven their connection was stronger than any force the world could bring to bear against them. The Sabaudi archipelago emerged from the horizon like a fever dream made manifest, its massive mangrove trees rising from the ocean floor with trunks so vast that entire cities had been built upon their roots. The bubbles that gave the island its distinctive character floated through the air in endless streams, catching sunlight and transforming the very atmosphere into something that seemed more magical than natural. For the Straw Hat Pirates, this represented their final stop before attempting to reach the New World, the last chance to prepare for challenges that would make their previous adventures seem like childhood games. The presence of the other supernovas on the island created an electric tension that even civilians could feel. 11 rookie pirates, whose bounties exceeded 100 million berries, each gathering in one place for the first time since they had begun their individual journeys toward legend. Each crew possessed their own distinctive character, their own approach to the pursuit of impossible dreams, yet all were united by the common recognition that they stood at the threshold of something greater than any single individual could achieve alone. Trafalgar Law's submarine surfaced near the mangrove groves like a predator emerging from the depths, his crew's coordinated movements speaking to discipline that went beyond mere pirate organization. The surgeon's reputation preceded him across the archipelago. Whispers of his medical expertise, intertwined with accounts of surgical precision, applied to combat situations. His bounty reflected not just his individual strength, but the strategic thinking that made him dangerous to world government interests. Eustace Kidd's magnetic powers had already left their mark on several groves, twisted metal sculptures, marking the path of his crew's passage through the island's commercial districts. His temper was legendary even among pirates, his willingness to inflict violence for perceived slights, creating a trail of destruction that forced other visitors to adjust their own plans to avoid inadvertent confrontation with someone whose definition of acceptable provocation remained frustratingly broad. Basil Hawkins moved through the crowds like a fortune teller, reading signs invisible to everyone else, his cards providing guidance that seemed to transcend mere probability calculation. The magic that surrounded his predictions created uncertainty, even among those who prided themselves on rational thinking. The possibility that fate might be more than mere superstition, adding weight to decisions that already carried enormous consequences. The human auction house represented everything that was wrong with the world condensed into a single building. Slavery disguised as commerce and suffering, packaged as entertainment for those wealthy enough to afford such diversions. The casual cruelty of the bidding process, the reduction of human beings to property valued solely for their potential utility, created an atmosphere of institutionalized evil that made even hardened criminals uncomfortable. Luffy's infiltration of the auction house had been motivated by simple curiosity about the unusual architecture, but the scene that greeted him inside ignited every instinct for justice that Shanks had helped nurture during his formative years. The sight of Kami on the auction block, tears streaming down her face as strangers decided her monetary value, transformed what might have been mere observation into moral imperative that demanded immediate action. The presence of the world nobles in the auction house elevated the stakes beyond anything the Straw Hats had previously encountered. Their mere existence in the same building, creating diplomatic complications that could affect entire nations. These were not ordinary enemies who could be fought and defeated through conventional means, but living symbols of a system that commanded respect through terror rather than earning it through merit. St. Charlos embodied everything that was corrupt about inherited privilege. His casual cruelty toward those he considered beneath his notice, revealing the depths of moral bankruptcy that absolute power could create in those who had never faced consequences for their actions. His decision to shoot Hachan for the crime of existing in his presence was not aberrant behavior, but standard operating procedure for someone who had never learned that other people possessed worth independent of their utility to him. The punch that Luffy delivered to the world noble's face echoed throughout the auction house like a thunderclap, the sound carrying implications that extended far beyond the immediate satisfaction of seeing justice applied to someone who had spent his entire life evading it. This was not just violence against an individual, but rebellion against everything that individual represented, a declaration that some actions were so fundamentally wrong that they demanded response regardless of the consequences such response might bring. The aftermath of that single punch created ripples that spread across the entire world. Admiral Kizaru's deployment to Sabaudi, representing the world government's recognition that what had occurred could not be dismissed as mere pirate misbehavior. The assault on a world noble demanded response proportional to the threat it posed to the entire system of inherited privilege that kept the current order stable. The battle that erupted between the three supernovas and Kizaru demonstrated both how far they had come and how far they still had to go, their combined efforts barely sufficient to create openings for escape, rather than achieving anything approaching victory. The Admiral's light-based powers operated on a scale that made conventional combat strategies meaningless, his ability to move at the speed of light transforming every encounter into a test of reflexes that human nervous systems were not designed to pass. The arrival of Bartholomew Kuma transformed what had been a difficult but manageable situation into something approaching apocalypse. The warlord's pawpaw powers, creating tactical challenges that went beyond anything they had previously encountered. His ability to repel anything he touched, including abstract concepts like pain and fatigue, made him effectively untouchable, while simultaneously giving him offensive capabilities that could end fights before opponents realized they had begun. The systematic separation of the crew represented Luffy's greatest failure as a captain, his inability to protect the people who had chosen to follow him into danger that exceeded their ability to handle. One by one, his crewmates vanished into Kuma's paw bubbles, transported to destinations unknown while Luffy stood helpless to prevent their disappearance. Each loss felt like amputation, the removal of limbs that had become essential to his functioning as both pirate and person. Zoro's disappearance came first, the swordsman's attempt to shield his captain from Kuma's attack, resulting in his own transportation to an island where his training would be supervised by the very enemy who had once tried to kill him. The irony of Dracul Mihawk becoming his instructor would only become apparent later. The greatest swordsman in the world recognizing potential that was worth nurturing despite their previous antagonistic relationship. Brook's vanishing followed immediately after, the musician's recent addition to the crew making his loss feel particularly cruel. as if the universe were mocking their attempts to build a complete family by removing members as quickly as they were acquired. His destination would prove to be a nightmare realm, populated by creatures that challenged even his unique relationship with death and resurrection. Usopp disappeared while attempting to provide covering fire for his captain's escape, the sniper's courage in facing impossible odds serving as proof that his growth throughout their journey had been more than mere technical skill development. The island where he would spend the next 2 years would transform his understanding of what it meant to support others through careful application of knowledge and preparation. Sanji vanished while trying to protect Nami from Kuma's next attack, his instinctive chivalry making him an easy target for someone who understood how to exploit noble impulses for tactical advantage. The hell he would endure on Momoro Island would challenge his understanding of gender identity while forcing him to develop fighting techniques that incorporated elements he had never considered combining. Frankie's disappearance came as he attempted to use his cyborg body to physically restrain Kuma, his mechanical strength meaningless against powers that operated according to principles that transcended physical law. The island of technological marvels where he would spend his exile would provide him with knowledge that transformed his understanding of what was possible when science and ambition combined forces. Nami vanished while trying to reach Luffy, her navigator's instincts recognizing that maintaining crew cohesion was more important than individual survival, but lacking the power necessary to resist forces that operated on scales she could not influence. Her time on Weatheria would teach her that controlling weather was about understanding natural systems, rather than simply applying force to atmospheric phenomena. Chopper's disappearance was perhaps the most heartbreaking, the young reindeer's medical instincts making him desperately want to help his injured crewmates even as circumstances made such assistance impossible. His exile to Torino Kingdom would challenge him to develop healing techniques that went beyond conventional medicine while learning that sometimes the best way to help others was to become stronger himself. Robin vanished last, her attempt to use her devil fruit powers to coordinate their escape, demonstrating strategic thinking that might have succeeded against less overwhelming opposition. Her transportation to Tequila Wolf would provide her with first-hand experience of the world government's labor practices while connecting her with revolutionaries whose goals aligned with her own understanding of justice. Luffy's own disappearance came only after he had witnessed the complete destruction of everything he had built. His crew scattered across the world, and his dreams apparently reduced to nothing more than naive ambitions that reality had finally crushed. The pore bubble that carried him away from Sabaody contained not just his body, but his first real taste of complete defeat, the recognition that power without wisdom was insufficient to protect the people who mattered most. Amazon Lily should have been a sanctuary where he could recover from the trauma of separation and defeat. But the island's isolation from the outside world meant that its inhabitants possessed no understanding of the emotional wounds he carried. Boa Hancock's initial hostility transformed into something approaching obsession once she recognized the depths of suffering that motivated his desperate attempts to reunite with his missing crewmates. The revelation of Ace's capture and impending execution transformed Luffy's personal tragedy into something that threatened to destroy what remained of his family, the brother who had taught him what loyalty meant, now facing death because of parentage he had never chosen. The news came at the worst possible moment, when Luffy was least prepared to handle additional emotional stress, yet it provided focus that channeled his grief into purposeful action. The infiltration of Impel Down represented Luffy's most desperate gambit, the penetration of a fortress that had never been breached by someone whose only advantages were determination and the kind of allies that desperation could attract. The underwater prison contained horrors that went beyond mere physical torment, psychological torture designed to break spirits before bodies surrendered to the inevitable. The alliance with unlikely companions demonstrated Luffy's ability to inspire loyalty even among those who had every reason to consider him an enemy. His sincerity, cutting through layers of cynicism and self-interest to reach something fundamental about the human desire to be part of something greater than individual survival. Buggy, Mr. 3, and even Crocodile found themselves following someone whose dreams were infectious despite their apparent impossibility. The descent through Impel Down's levels revealed the systematic cruelty that the world government employed to maintain order, each floor designed to inflict specific types of suffering on prisoners whose crimes ranged from minor infractions to genuine threats to social stability. The progression from uncomfortable heat to deadly cold to psychological torture demonstrated the methodical nature of officially sanctioned cruelty. The encounter with Magellan provided Luffy with his first real taste of an opponent whose powers were designed specifically to kill. The Warden's poison abilities, creating tactical challenges that could not be overcome through conventional applications of strength or speed. The battle that followed was less fight than extended assassination attempt. Magellan's venom, designed to ensure that victory was merely a matter of time rather than skill. The rescue by Ivankov represented divine intervention in the form of medical knowledge that transcended conventional understanding, hormone therapy that could accomplish miracles when applied by someone who understood the intricate relationships between body chemistry and physical capability. The treatment that followed was as much spiritual healing as medical intervention, forcing Luffy to confront the reality of his own mortality while providing him with strength to continue fighting. The prison break that followed involved hundreds of inmates whose crimes had earned them sentences that were effectively death delayed rather than justice served, men whose desperation made them willing to follow anyone who offered hope of escape regardless of how slim such hope might appear. Their loyalty was born from recognition that Luffy represented something they had thought lost forever, the possibility that individual action could challenge systemic oppression. The journey to Marineford took place aboard a stolen battleship crewed by criminals whose only common ground was their shared hatred of the system that had imprisoned them, an alliance held together by nothing more substantial than mutual desperation, and the charismatic presence of someone whose faith in impossible outcomes made those outcomes seem achievable. The war that awaited them at Marineford was unlike anything the world had witnessed in living memory. 3 admirals and a fleet admiral, arrayed against the strongest pirate crew in existence, while thousands of subordinates prepared to die for the privilege of participating in something that would define an entire era. The execution platform where Ace waited represented more than just one man's death sentence. It was a symbol of the world government's power to destroy anyone who challenged their authority. Whitebeard's arrival changed the fundamental nature of the battlefield, his presence transforming what might have been a one-sided slaughter into genuine warfare between forces that possessed comparable strength. The earthquake powers that had earned him the title of world's strongest man created tactical opportunities that had not existed before his intervention, reshaping the very geography of Marineford to provide advantages for those who possessed the courage to seize them. The battle that followed tested every skill Luffy had developed, every bond he had forged, every conviction he held about the power of individual will to overcome organized opposition. His progress across the battlefield was measured not just in distance covered, but in obstacles overcome. Each step toward the execution platform requiring him to transcend limitations he had not even realized he possessed. The moment when Ace's handcuffs finally fell away should have represented triumph, the successful completion of a rescue mission that had seemed impossible from its inception. Instead, it marked the beginning of an even greater tragedy. Admiral Akanu's provocation, triggering the pride that had always been Ace's greatest weakness. The insult to Whitebeard's honor demanded response, regardless of the tactical situation, loyalty overriding strategic thinking in ways that would prove fatal. The magma fist that pierced Ace's chest was not just an attack on one individual, but an assault on everything that Luffy believed about the power of determination to overcome any obstacle. For the first time in his life, he encountered a problem that could not be solved through greater effort or stronger conviction, a loss so absolute that it challenged his fundamental understanding of how the world operated. Ace's final words carried the weight of all the conversations they had never had, all the adventures they would never share, all the dreams that would remain forever unfulfilled. His gratitude for being allowed to live and love despite the circumstances of his birth provided closure for wounds that had shaped his entire existence, but that closure came at the cost of Luffy's emotional stability. The breakdown that followed was complete and public, Luffy's grief overwhelming every other consideration as he knelt beside his brother's cooling body and screamed his anguish to a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible. The war continued around him, but for those crucial moments, nothing existed except the reality of loss too great to be processed by normal psychological mechanisms. The rescue that followed involved allies whose existence Luffy had not even suspected, the Heart Pirate submarine providing sanctuary at the moment when continued exposure to the battlefield would have meant certain death. Law's medical skills were tested to their limits in treating wounds that went beyond physical trauma to encompass spiritual damage that might never fully heal. The 2 weeks that Luffy spent unconscious were marked by dreams and nightmares that processed his grief in ways his waking mind could not handle. The replay of memories both beautiful and terrible as his psyche struggled to accept a reality where Ace's laughter would never again echo through their shared adventures. His awakening brought not relief, but renewed confrontation, with loss that seemed to grow larger rather than smaller with time. The rampage that followed his awakening was perhaps inevitable, rage and denial, combining to create destructive impulses that could only be satisfied through violence against a world that had taken everything he valued most. The forest that bore the brunt of his fury was reduced to splinters and craters, but no amount of destruction could restore what had been lost or ease the pain that threatened to consume him entirely. Jinbei's intervention came not through superior strength, but through superior wisdom, the fishman's words cutting through Luffy's emotional chaos to reach the parts of his mind that still functioned rationally. The reminder that Ace would not be the last person he would lose, but that others remained who needed his protection, provided just enough motivation to prevent complete psychological collapse. The decision to delay their reunion by 2 years represented Luffy's first real acknowledgement of his own limitations, the recognition that good intentions were insufficient to protect people he cared about when those intentions were not supported by adequate strength. The message he sent to his scattered crewmates carried implications that went far beyond simple scheduling changes, representing his evolution from impulsive teenager to strategic thinker capable of long-term planning. The training that would follow on Rusukaina Island would test every aspect of his character, forcing him to confront not just external challenges but internal weaknesses that had contributed to his failure at Marineford. Under Rayleigh's guidance, he would develop not just new techniques but new understanding of what it meant to be responsible for others' safety in a world where individual strength could determine the fate of entire crews. But even as he prepared for the trials ahead, Luffy carried with him the memory of Ace's sacrifice, the knowledge that love sometimes demanded prices too high to be willingly paid. The straw hat that sat upon his head now bore witness not just to Shanks's confidence in his potential, but to Ace's faith that his little brother would grow into someone worthy of the dreams they had once shared. The weight of that responsibility would guide him through the darkness ahead, ensuring that when he finally emerged from his training, he would be ready to protect not just his existing crew but anyone else who chose to place their trust in the boy who refused to let tragedy define his future. The message that echoed across Sabaudi archipelago 2 years later carried implications that extended far beyond its simple numerical code. The tattoo on Luffy's arm spelling out a promise that transcended the immediate tactical considerations of pirate crew coordination. 3 days crossed out, 2 years written in its place. A declaration that the boy who had rushed headlong into every challenge would now approach his dreams with the patience of someone who had learned the true cost of insufficient preparation. Rusukena Island rose from the sea like a monument to natural selection, its ecosystem designed by forces that favored only the strongest, most adaptable survivors. 48 seasons cycled through the island's climate system each year, creating environmental challenges that shifted with unpredictable regularity, ensuring that nothing could remain unchanged for long. The beasts that inhabited this primeval sanctuary had evolved beyond normal parameters, their strength and cunning honed by constant exposure to conditions that would kill lesser creatures within days. Rayleigh's presence on the island transformed what might have been mere survival training into something approaching spiritual education, the former right hand of the Pirate King, bringing wisdom accumulated through decades of sailing the most dangerous waters in the world. His understanding of Haki went beyond technical knowledge to encompass philosophical foundations, the recognition that true strength came not from dominating others but from understanding the connections that bound all living things together. The first lessons in Busoshoku Haki required Luffy to fundamentally alter his relationship with combat, moving beyond the straightforward application of rubber-enhanced strength to embrace concepts that seemed to contradict everything he thought he knew about fighting. The idea that invisible armor could be more effective than any physical defense challenged assumptions that had guided his development since childhood, forcing him to accept that power took forms he had never considered. The process of learning to coat his attacks with spiritual energy was like learning a new language where the vocabulary consisted of will made manifest, and the grammar followed rules that existed nowhere else in nature. Each successful application of Busoshoku required precise control over mental states that had previously been unconscious, the transformation of instinctive reactions into deliberate techniques that could be deployed at will. Kenbun Shoku Haki presented even greater challenges, demanding that he quiet his naturally restless mind sufficiently to perceive threats and intentions that existed beyond the range of physical senses. The meditation required for such perception felt alien to someone whose entire approach to life had been characterized by immediate action and instinctive response to whatever presented itself in the moment. The advanced applications of observation Haki that Rayleigh demonstrated seemed to operate according to principles that bordered on precognition, the ability to perceive not just what was happening but what was about to happen, creating tactical advantages that transcended normal human limitations. The brief glimpses into possible futures that such mastery provided came with their own psychological costs. The knowledge of what might occur carrying responsibility for choosing which possibilities to allow to manifest. The final form of Haki that Rayleigh revealed was perhaps the most dangerous to learn, Hao Shoku representing not just another technique but the expression of qualities that could not be taught or trained, but only awakened in those who possessed them naturally. The ability to impose one's will directly onto others carried implications that went far beyond combat effectiveness, representing power that could easily corrupt those who wielded it without proper understanding of its responsibilities. The beasts of Rusukena provided testing grounds for techniques that could not be properly evaluated against human opponents, their raw strength and survival instincts creating scenarios where failure meant death rather than mere defeat. Each species presented unique challenges that required different approaches, forcing Luffy to develop adaptability that went beyond simply applying greater force to overcome resistance. The development of Gear 4 emerged from necessity rather than inspiration, His encounters with creatures whose strength exceeded his rubber-enhanced capabilities, demanding innovations that pushed his devil fruit powers into entirely new territory. The technique that allowed him to inflate his muscles while coating them with haki created physical capabilities that seemed to violate natural law, transforming his body into something that possessed the elasticity of rubber while maintaining the hardness of steel. The psychological toll of isolation during these training sessions was perhaps more challenging than any physical hardship the island could provide, months passing without human conversation, while he struggled to master techniques that required levels of concentration he had never previously achieved. The solitude that had once been unbearable gradually became necessary, providing the mental space required for growth that could not occur amid the distractions of normal social interaction. The memories of Ace's death served as both motivation and torment throughout the training process. The knowledge of his failure to protect his brother, driving him to push beyond limitations that his body insisted were absolute. Each moment of physical agony became an offering to Ace's memory, proof that his sacrifice would not be meaningless if it inspired sufficient growth in those who survived to honor it. The development of specific gear force variations required him to understand not just how to manipulate his rubber body, but how to coordinate such manipulation with haki applications that enhanced rather than interfered with his natural abilities. Boundman provided the raw power necessary for overwhelming opponents whose strength exceeded normal human parameters, while Tankman offered defensive capabilities that could absorb attacks that would normally prove fatal. The refinement of his basic techniques under Rayleigh's guidance revealed how much potential had remained untapped in approaches he had considered fully developed. The application of haki to familiar attacks, transforming them from impressive displays into genuinely devastating weapons. The Red Hawk that channeled both rubber elasticity and spiritual fire represented synthesis between old methods and new understanding. The philosophical discussions that occurred between training sessions were perhaps as valuable as the physical instruction. Rayleigh's insights into the nature of leadership and responsibility, providing context for techniques that could easily be misused by someone who lacked proper understanding of their implications. The revelation that strength without wisdom was ultimately self-defeating helped shape Luffy's approach to developing abilities that carried the potential for both great good and great harm. The stories of Roger's crew that Rayleigh shared during quiet moments provided glimpses into possibilities that awaited those who possessed both the strength and character necessary to reach Laughtail, the final island where whatever Joy Boy had left behind continued to wait for someone worthy of receiving it. These tales served as both inspiration and warning, demonstrating that even the greatest achievements came with costs that could not be calculated in advance. The gradual mastery of advanced Busoshoku techniques opened tactical possibilities that had not existed before his training. The ability to project spiritual armor beyond his physical body, creating offensive and defensive options that transcended normal limitations. The internal destruction techniques that could bypass external defenses represented power that demanded careful moral consideration. Abilities that could kill with casual ease, if applied without appropriate restraint. The development of future sight through Kenbunshoku training required him to accept that knowledge of what was coming did not automatically provide the power to change it, that seeing multiple possible futures was meaningless without the strength and wisdom necessary to guide events toward preferred outcomes. The psychological burden of such perception weighed heavily on someone whose natural inclination was to live entirely in the present moment. The integration of all three types of haki into a coherent fighting style represented more than technical achievement. It marked his evolution from someone who fought with instinct and determination alone to someone whose combat abilities were informed by understanding of forces that operated beyond physical law. The harmony between these different forms of spiritual energy created capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual applications. The realization that his crewmates were undergoing their own transformations on distant islands provided comfort during moments when isolation threatened to overwhelm his determination to complete his training. The knowledge that Zoro was facing Mihawk's instruction, that Nami was learning to command weather itself, that each member was growing in ways that would complement his own development, sustained him through periods when progress seemed impossible to achieve. The final months of training focused not on learning new techniques, but on refining his control over abilities that could easily destroy him if deployed carelessly. The recognition that power without precision was more dangerous to its wielder than to any enemy. The discipline required for such control felt alien to his naturally impulsive nature, but the memory of his failures made acceptance of such constraints necessary rather than optional. The development of Gear 2nd and 3rd improvements under Rayleigh's guidance addressed limitations that had become apparent during his most challenging battles, the enhancement of existing techniques through Haki application, creating capabilities that maintained familiar forms while achieving entirely new levels of effectiveness. The stamina improvements that came with better understanding of his body's systems allowed for sustained combat that had previously been impossible. The meditation practices that Rayleigh insisted upon were perhaps the most difficult aspect of the entire training regimen, requiring someone whose mind naturally raced between different interests to achieve states of mental stillness that seemed to contradict his essential nature. Yet these practices proved crucial for developing the internal awareness necessary for advanced Haki applications, the ability to perceive and control spiritual energy, depending on self-knowledge that could only be achieved through careful introspection. The anniversary of Ace's death provided the darkest moment of the entire training period, grief that had been temporarily suppressed by the demands of constant improvement, resurging with full force when external distractions were absent. The recognition that his brother would never see the strength he was developing, would never share in the adventures that lay ahead, created emotional pain that no amount of physical conditioning could alleviate. The resolution that emerged from that anniversary marked a crucial shift in his understanding of what the training was meant to achieve. The recognition that becoming stronger was not about erasing the past, but about ensuring that future losses would not occur through his inadequacy. Ace's sacrifice would be honored, not through revenge against those who had killed him, but through protection of those who still lived to benefit from such protection. The final weeks on Rusukaina were dedicated to testing himself against the island's most dangerous inhabitants, creatures whose strength had initially seemed impossible to overcome, now serving as measurements of growth that could be quantified through direct comparison. The beasts that had once been mortal threats became manageable opponents, their defeat serving as proof that transformation could be achieved through sufficient dedication and proper instruction. The reunion with Rayleigh at the end of the training period carried emotional weight that went beyond mere graduation from instruction. The old pirate's satisfaction with his students' progress, serving as validation that the sacrifices required for such growth had been worthwhile. The knowledge that he had learned everything that could be taught created both confidence and responsibility. The recognition that further development would depend entirely on his own choices and experiences. The final lesson that Rayleigh imparted was perhaps the most important, that strength was meaningless without people to protect, that all the power in the world could not replace the bonds that gave life meaning. The crew that awaited his return had also grown during their separation, their individual development, creating possibilities for collective achievement that had not existed before their scattering at Sabaudi. The departure from Rusukaina represented more than the end of training. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, in which the boy who had once relied on determination alone would now command abilities that operated according to principles he finally understood. The straw hat that had witnessed his transformation sat upon his head as evidence of promises kept and duties accepted, the symbol of dreams that had survived every test the world could devise. As the island faded into the distance behind Hancock's ship, Luffy carried with him not just new techniques, but new understanding of what it meant to be captain of a crew whose members had chosen to trust him with their dreams as well as their lives. The reunion that awaited at Sabaudi would reveal whether the growth they had all achieved in isolation could be integrated into collective strength that exceeded anything they had previously imagined possible. The 2 years of separation had ended, but the adventure they represented was only beginning. The new world beckoned with challenges that would test every lesson learned, every bond forged, every conviction held about the power of dreams to reshape reality according to the will of those brave enough to pursue them without reservation. The reunion at Sabaudi Archipelago should have been a moment of pure joy, the culmination of 2 years spent in forced separation, while each member of the crew underwent transformations that would have seemed impossible when they first set sail from the East Blue. Instead, the atmosphere was charged with tension that spoke to how much had changed, not just in their individual capabilities, but in the world's perception of what the Straw Hat Pirates represented. The Marines who patrolled the mangrove groves moved with the heightened alertness of soldiers who knew they were hunting prey that had evolved beyond their previous understanding. The fake Straw Hats who had gathered on Grove 46 represented more than mere imposters seeking to capitalize on someone else's reputation. They embodied the world's recognition that the name itself had become valuable enough to steal. Their crude attempts at mimicry revealed how legendary the crew had become during their absence, their exploits having grown in the telling until reality and myth had become indistinguishable in the public imagination. Luffy's effortless dispatch of the pretenders with a single burst of Conqueror's Haki announced his return, not just to his scattered crewmates, but to every marine, pirate, and bounty hunter on the island, the unconscious bodies that fell like wheat before a scythe, provided stark demonstration of growth that went beyond mere technical improvement to encompass fundamental transformation in the nature of his spiritual presence. The authentic members of his crew who witnessed this display found themselves looking at someone who remained essentially unchanged in personality while having evolved dramatically in capability. Zoro's satisfied grin as he observed Luffy's casual application of power spoke to recognition between warriors who had both transcended their previous limitations through discipline and sacrifice that others could barely imagine. Sanji's excitement at their captain's return was tempered by professional assessment of techniques that incorporated elements he had never seen before. The cook's own transformation during his time on Momoro Island, providing him with perspective on just how much growth could be achieved when desperation met proper instruction. The reunion carried undertones of mutual evaluation as each member silently measured changes that 2 years of separation had wrought in their family. The departure from Sabaudi aboard the coated Thousand Sunny marked their transition from the first half of the Grand Line to the New World, waters where the rules that had governed their previous adventures would prove inadequate for challenges that lay ahead. The coating process that allowed their ship to submerge represented more than technological marvel. It symbolized their willingness to dive into depths that had claimed countless other crews who had attempted the same journey. Fishman Island appeared beneath the waves like a jewel lost in oceanic darkness, its bubble-enclosed cities creating an underwater paradise that defied every assumption about what was possible 10,000 meters below the surface. The artificial sun that provided illumination for this submerged kingdom represented triumph of engineering over environmental limitation, proof that determination could create beauty in places where none should have been able to exist. The discrimination that had shaped Fishman Island's history provided Luffy with his first real exposure to systemic prejudice that went beyond individual cruelty to encompass entire societies built upon assumptions of racial superiority. The segregation between fishmen and humans had created wounds that festered across generations, each side nursing grievances that justified further hatred in endless cycles of retribution and resentment. Jinbei's presence on the island carried weight that extended far beyond his individual strength or reputation. His status as one of the 7 warlords, representing the complex political calculations that had shaped relationships between Fishman Island and the surface world. His decision to meet with Luffy, despite the risks such association might bring, demonstrated commitment to principles that transcended mere political expedience. The new Fishman pirates represented everything that was toxic about racial pride when it curdled into supremacist ideology, their leader Hody Jones embodying hatred so pure that it had consumed every other aspect of his identity. His abuse of energy steroids served as metaphor for the way that anger could provide temporary strength, while ultimately destroying those who relied upon it as their primary source of power. The battle for Fishman Island's soul played out not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of citizens who had to choose between the easy comfort of familiar prejudices and the difficult work of building bridges across divisions that had defined their society for centuries. Princess Shirahoshi's courage in facing those who sought her death demonstrated the kind of moral leadership that could inspire transformation even in the most entrenched circumstances. Luffy's defeat of Hody Jones was notable not for its difficulty, but for its ease. The protagonist who had once struggled against Arlong now finding Fishman's strength insufficient to provide meaningful challenge to someone who had mastered Haki. The victory served as measurement of growth that could be quantified through direct comparison. Proof that 2 years of training had created capabilities that dwarfed his previous limitations. The revelation of Shirahoshi's identity as an ancient weapon carried implications that stretched far beyond Fishman Island's immediate concerns. Her power to command sea kings, representing force that could reshape entire oceans if properly directed. Her innocence and gentleness provided stark contrast to the destructive potential she embodied, raising questions about whether such power could ever be wielded without corruption. The departure from Fishman Island was marked by promises that went beyond mere friendship to encompass protection that would extend across whatever distances might separate them in the future. The declaration of Fishman Island as territory under Luffy's protection served notice to the world that his ambitions had evolved beyond personal adventure to encompass responsibilities that could affect entire nations. Punk Hazard appeared on their log pose as a destination that should not have existed, an island split between fire and ice in defiance of natural law, its very existence suggesting experiments that had gone beyond scientific curiosity to embrace wholesale manipulation of environmental systems. The laboratory that crowned its frozen peaks served as monument to the kinds of horrors that could result when brilliant minds operated without moral constraints. Caesar Clown's experiments on children represented evil that was particularly repugnant to someone whose own childhood had been shaped by adults who, however harsh their methods, had ultimately acted in his best interests. The sight of children suffering withdrawal from drugs, administered under the guise of medical treatment, triggered protective instincts that had been honed through years of defending those who could not defend themselves. The alliance with Trafalgar Law marked the first time Luffy had agreed to subordinate his immediate impulses to longer-term strategic planning. The surgeon's proposal to target one of the 4 emperors requiring patience and coordination that had once been foreign to his nature. The plan that emerged combined Law's calculating intelligence with Luffy's innovative approach to problem-solving in ways that created possibilities neither could have achieved alone. The confrontation with Law over the true nature of their alliance revealed depths of psychological damage that had shaped the surgeon's entire approach to relationships. his inability to trust stemming from betrayals that had occurred during his formative years. The revelation that their partnership was built upon deception rather than mutual respect should have destroyed their cooperation, yet somehow only strengthened bonds that were founded on deeper compatibility of purpose. Doflamingo's influence over Dressrosa represented corruption that had metastasized throughout an entire kingdom, his string-based powers serving as metaphor for the ways that manipulation could transform citizens into puppets who performed according to scripts they had never consciously chosen to follow. The toys that populated his kingdom were not whimsical decorations, but former humans whose memories had been erased from the minds of those who had once loved them. The Corrida Coliseum provided Luffy with his first opportunity to compete for a prize that carried emotional weight beyond its practical value. Ace's devil fruit representing not just power, but connection to a brother whose sacrifice continued to motivate every choice he made. The tournament that would determine the fruit's new owner brought together warriors whose strength reflected the elevated standards that prevailed in the New World. The encounter with Sabo in the Colosseum was perhaps the most emotionally overwhelming moment of Luffy's entire journey. The brother he had mourned for 13 years revealing himself to be not just alive, but grown into someone whose strength matched his revolutionary ideals. The tears that flowed during their reunion spoke to grief that had shaped both their characters, loss that had been transformed into determination to prevent similar tragedies from occurring to others. The battle for Dressrosa that followed involved not just the Straw Hat crew, but an alliance of former enemies and unlikely allies, whose cooperation demonstrated how Luffy's influence could transform adversaries into friends through the simple expedient of treating them with respect, rather than condescension. The gladiators who had competed against him in the Colosseum became comrades whose loyalty was earned through shared combat, rather than demanded through fear or obligation. The revelation of Gear 4th represented the culmination of 2 years' training compressed into a form that combined all the lessons Rayleigh had taught about the integration of Haki with devil fruit powers. Boundman's overwhelming strength provided demonstration of growth that could be measured against opponents who had previously seemed impossible to defeat. Doflamingo's string abilities proving insufficient to contend with force that operated on entirely different principles. The liberation of Dressrosa from Doflamingo's control marked more than just another victory over tyranny. It represented Luffy's evolution from someone who stumbled into conflicts to someone whose very presence inspired others to stand against oppression. The citizens who cheered his name were celebrating not just their freedom, but the example he had provided of how individual courage could catalyze collective action. The formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet occurred despite Luffy's protests rather than because of his planning. 7 crews of powerful pirates voluntarily subordinating themselves to someone whose refusal to accept formal authority only made him more worthy of the loyalty they offered. The Sake ceremony that formalized their alliance created bonds that would endure across whatever distances might separate them in years to come. The increase in Luffy's bounty to 500 million berries reflected not just his individual accomplishments, but the world's recognition that he had become a genuine threat to the established order, someone whose continued existence posed challenges that went beyond mere law enforcement to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of justice and authority. The title of Fifth Emperor that some newspapers began applying to him was both premature and prophetic, acknowledging potential that had not yet been fully realized. Zoo's revelation that road poneglyphs held the key to reaching Laugh Tale provided concrete direction for dreams that had previously been guided only by intuition and determination. The ancient stones scattered across the world contained information that had been preserved for centuries by those who understood its value, even if they could not act upon it themselves. The alliance with the Mink tribe added another layer to the growing coalition that seemed to form naturally around Luffy's presence. Neko Mamushi and Inuarashi's decision to support his quest, representing judgment by beings whose lifespans provided perspective on historical patterns that most humans could not perceive. Their knowledge of the Void Century carried implications that reached far beyond pirate adventures to encompass secrets that the world government had spent 800 years trying to suppress. The preparation for confronting Kaido required strategic thinking that went beyond anything Luffy had previously undertaken, the coordination of multiple crews and factions demanding skills that had never been part of his natural repertoire. The transformation from impulsive teenager to someone capable of inspiring and coordinating complex military operations represented growth that could not be measured in terms of physical power alone. Big Mom's pursuit of the Straw Hats for perceived slights to her dignity demonstrated how the actions of individual pirates could trigger responses that affected entire regions. Her rage at being denied the wedding she had planned, creating chaos that spread across multiple islands. The Emperor's tantrum served as a reminder that power without wisdom could be as dangerous to its possessor as to anyone else. The infiltration of Whole Cake Island marked Luffy's first direct confrontation with an emperor on her own territory, the rescue of Sanji requiring him to operate according to principles of stealth and misdirection that contradicted every instinct he had developed during years of straightforward combat. The success of their escape owed more to preparation and cooperation than to individual strength, demonstrating how much his approach to problem-solving had matured. As they sailed away from Whole Cake Island with Sanji restored to their crew and their bonds stronger than ever, Luffy could look back on adventures that had tested every aspect of their development while pointing toward challenges that would make everything they had previously faced seem like preparation rather than culmination. The New World had accepted them as legitimate contenders in the greatest game ever played, and they intended to prove that acceptance had not been misplaced. The designation as Fifth Emperor felt both premature and inevitable, recognition of potential that had not yet been fully realized, but which seemed destined to reshape the world according to principles that valued freedom over security, friendship over power, and dreams over acceptance of limiting reality. The boy who had once declared his intention to become Pirate King was beginning to demonstrate that such declarations were not mere boasts, but prophecies waiting for the right circumstances to be fulfilled. The arrival at Zoo transformed their understanding of what was possible in a world where the impossible had become routine. The ancient elephant carrying an entire civilization upon its back, serving as living proof that some legends were founded in reality rather than imagination. Zunaisha's millennia-long journey across the oceans represented punishment for crimes so ancient that their nature had been forgotten by all except those who bore responsibility for remembering. The elephant's eternal wandering serving as both penance and preservation of knowledge that the world had tried to erase. The Mink tribe's welcome was unlike anything they had experienced in their travels, hospitality that transcended species barriers to embrace visitors as family members whose arrival had been anticipated rather than merely hoped for. The electro abilities that each Mink possessed naturally created tactical challenges that would have been insurmountable for enemies. Yet these same powers were deployed in service of celebration and joy, rather than conquest or domination. Neko Mamushi and Inuarashi's ancient feud revealed the ways that personal conflicts could poison entire communities when those involved possessed sufficient authority to force others to choose sides in battles that predated most of their subjects' births. The alternating day and night rulership that had emerged from their inability to coexist demonstrated both creative problem-solving and the fundamental dysfunction that resulted when pride prevented rational resolution of solvable problems. The revelation that road poneglyphs contained the key to reaching Laugh-Tale provided concrete direction for dreams that had previously been guided by intuition alone. The ancient stones representing a puzzle that had waited centuries for someone with both the strength to collect them and the wisdom to understand their significance. The knowledge that only 4 such stones existed in the entire world transformed their quest from vague aspiration into specific challenge with measurable objectives. Pedro's sacrifice during their eventual escape from Whole Cake Island would demonstrate the depth of commitment that Luffy's dreams could inspire in those who understood their significance. The jaguar mink, choosing death over failure in ways that honored both his own people's traditions and the cause he had chosen to support. His final explosion was not desperate act but calculated decision, trading one life for many in mathematics that made perfect sense to someone who understood what was at stake. The journey to Whole Cake Island began not as invasion, but as rescue mission, Sanji's forced departure creating emotional wounds that could only be healed through direct confrontation with the family that had shaped his childhood through systematic cruelty disguised as education. The Vinsmoke name carried weight throughout the North Blue that was built upon reputation for efficiency in warfare. Their scientific approach to human enhancement, creating soldiers who possessed overwhelming power while lacking the emotional capacity that made such power dangerous to wield responsibly. Big Mom's territory represented power on a scale that dwarfed anything they had previously encountered. An emperor whose influence extended across dozens of islands and whose authority was enforced not just through personal strength, but through a network of children and subordinates, whose loyalty was secured through combinations of fear and codes. The anthropomorphic objects that populated her domain were not merely decorative, but represented the souls of those who had failed to meet their obligations, their consciousness imprisoned in inanimate forms as eternal reminder of what happened to those who disappointed her. The wedding that served as cover for their infiltration was more than ceremony, but political alliance designed to consolidate power that could challenge the world government's authority. The union between Sanji and Pudding representing merger of technologies and territories that would create capabilities no single faction could achieve alone. The assassination plot that emerged during the ceremony demonstrated how quickly celebrations could transform into battlefields when different factions possessed conflicting definitions of success. Sanji's internal conflict between loyalty to his crew and desire to protect Bharati from his family's threatened retaliation revealed the psychological scars that abusive childhoods could create, self-worth damaged in ways that made accepting help feel like imposing burden on others. His eventual decision to trust in his crew's strength rather than sacrificing himself for their supposed protection marked crucial growth in his understanding of what family relationships were supposed to provide. The confrontation with Katakuri in the mirror world became more than just battle between opponents, but philosophical dialogue conducted through violence, each fighter's technique revealing aspects of character that words could never adequately express. The Sweet Commander's perfection was both strength and weakness, his reputation for invincibility creating pressure that prevented him from acknowledging flaws that made him more rather than less human. Luffy's development of future sight during their extended combat represented breakthrough in observation haki that had previously seemed beyond his capabilities, the ability to perceive events before they occurred requiring mental discipline that contradicted his naturally impulsive approach to problem solving. The technique that emerged was not perfect precognition, but limited glimpse into possibilities, knowledge that had to be combined with strength and speed to prove useful in actual combat. The escape from Whole Cake Island required cooperation on a scale that transformed individual abilities into collective force capable of challenging an emperor's authority on her own territory, each crew member's contribution proving essential to their survival rather than merely helpful to their success. The Thousand Sunnies modifications that Frankie had incorporated during their timeskip proved crucial for dealing with threats that conventional ship design could never have anticipated. The Sun Pirates' intervention during their final escape demonstrated how Luffy's influence could inspire loyalty in those who had never sworn allegiance to him. Jinbei's former crew choosing to risk their lives for pirates they barely knew because their former captain's judgment was sufficient endorsement of their worthiness. The sacrifice they made in holding back Big Mom's pursuit bought time that could not have been purchased through any other currency. The declaration that Fishman Island was under Luffy's protection had consequences that extended far beyond symbolic gesture, marking his territory in waters that had previously been considered neutral or under Big Mom's indirect influence. The challenge this represented to the established order was not lost on other emperors, each recognizing that allowing such claims to stand unchallenged would invite similar encroachments on their own spheres of influence. The revelation of Sanji's bounty poster showing his actual face, rather than the crude drawing that had previously represented him, created complications that went beyond mere embarrassment. His recognition by those who had known him during childhood creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemies who understood the importance of psychological warfare. The modifications his siblings had undergone made them living advertisements for their father's scientific capabilities, demonstrations of what human enhancement could achieve when moral constraints were abandoned in pursuit of pure efficiency. The encounter with his father Judge revealed the philosophical gulf that separated those who viewed strength as end in itself from those who understood power as tool for protecting others. The patriarch's inability to comprehend why anyone would choose vulnerability over enhancement, demonstrating blindness that was moral rather than intellectual. His surprise at Sanji's emotional capacity suggested that he had genuinely believed human feeling was weakness rather than strength, that connections between people represented liability rather than asset. The rescue of the Vinsmoke family during their final battle demonstrated growth in Sanji's understanding of forgiveness, his decision to save those who had tormented him, based not on denial of past wrongs, but on recognition that revenge served no constructive purpose. The choice to break cycles of hatred rather than perpetuating them marked evolution from someone who had been shaped by cruelty into someone who actively chose to embody different values. The wedding cake that served as their final gambit represented synthesis of Sanji's culinary skills, with strategic thinking that went beyond mere cooking to encompass psychological manipulation of someone whose appetites were both strength and weakness. The collaboration with Pudding and Chiffon that created this masterpiece demonstrated how former enemies could become allies when larger purposes demanded cooperation over personal grievances. Big Mom's eating disorder provided insight into the ways that even seemingly invincible opponents possessed vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those who understood their nature. Her hunger fits representing loss of control that transformed overwhelming strength into manageable threat. The solution that emerged required not just defeating an enemy, but healing someone whose childhood trauma had created behavioral patterns that endangered everyone around her. The revelation that Pudding's three-eyed heritage made her potentially capable of reading poneglyphs added another layer to the complex relationships that had developed during their infiltration. Her value to various factions extending far beyond her role in the wedding ceremony. Her genuine affection for Sanji complicated motivations that had seemed straightforward, transforming what should have been simple deception into emotional conflict that affected everyone involved. The Mirror World battle's conclusion marked more than just victory over a powerful opponent, but recognition between fighters who had pushed each other beyond their previous limitations. Katakuri's acknowledgement of Luffy's growth representing judgment by someone whose standards were impossibly high. The respect that developed between them during their extended combat created bonds that transcended their opposing allegiances. The newspaper headlines that followed their escape transformed local incident into global event. The successful infiltration, an escape from an emperor's territory, proving that the New World's established hierarchy could be challenged by those who possessed sufficient courage and capability. The bounty increases that followed reflected not just individual achievements but collective recognition that the Straw Hat Pirates had evolved from promising rookies into genuine threats to the existing order. The title of Fifth Emperor that some publications began applying to Luffy was both premature acknowledgement of potential and prophecy of what seemed increasingly inevitable, his influence beginning to match that of the established powers, even though his territory and formal alliances remained limited compared to theirs. The designation created expectations that would shape how other factions viewed his actions, while creating pressure to live up to reputation he had not sought but could not avoid. The approach to Wano country represented culmination of plans that had been developing since their alliance with Law, the coordination of multiple factions whose cooperation was essential for challenging Kaido's authority, requiring diplomatic skills that went far beyond Luffy's natural inclinations. The closed borders that had isolated the country for centuries meant that information about conditions there was limited and potentially outdated, forcing them to prepare for scenarios they could not fully anticipate. The revelation that Momonosuke was actually the son of Kozuki Oden rather than Kinemon transformed their understanding of the political situation they were entering. The legitimate heir to Wano's shogunate, representing symbol that could inspire resistance among those who had accepted Orochi's rule as inevitable rather than temporary imposition. His devil fruit powers that allowed transformation into dragon form created both opportunities and complications for their planned rebellion. The alliance between Kaido and Big Mom that emerged just before their assault on Onigashima represented worst-case scenario that their planning had considered but hoped to avoid. Two emperors combining forces, creating opposition that exceeded anything they had previously faced. The temporary nature of such cooperation provided hope that differences between the allies could be exploited, but their immediate strength was overwhelming enough to threaten everyone involved in the resistance. The preparation for what would become the greatest battle of their lives required every alliance they had forged, every skill they had developed, every bond they had strengthened through years of shared adventure. The samurai who had waited 20 years for opportunity to reclaim their country brought dedication that matched the Straw Hats' determination, while the minks who had suffered under Jack's occupation possessed motivation that transcended mere alliance to encompass personal vengeance. The fire festival that would serve as cover for their assault represented celebration of traditions that Orochi had tried to suppress. The lighting of lanterns carrying wishes that had been deferred for 2 decades while their authors waited for circumstances that would make fulfillment possible. The symbolism of launching their rebellion during such observance added weight to their cause that went beyond mere military strategy to encompass cultural restoration. As they sailed toward Onigashima with allied forces that represented the largest coalition ever assembled under Luffy's indirect leadership, the boy who had once declared his intention to become Pirate King was preparing to face challenges that would test every aspect of his growth, while determining whether dreams could survive contact with enemies whose power had shaped the world for decades. The battle ahead would prove whether their preparation had been sufficient, or whether some obstacles remained too large for even the strongest will to overcome. The year 2020 marked the beginning of what history would remember as the greatest battle ever fought on the seas, a conflict that would determine not just the fate of Wano country, but the very trajectory of the world itself. As the fire festival began across the isolated nation, casting dancing shadows through streets where citizens celebrated in ignorant bliss, Monkey D. Luffy prepared to face his greatest challenge yet. The weight of countless promises pressed upon his shoulders to Tama, to Momo, to the memory of Oden, and to every soul who had suffered under Kaido's tyrannical rule. The approach to Onigashima carried with it an electricity that seemed to charge the very air around the assembled fleet. Ships of the ninja pirate mink samurai alliance cut through the waves with purpose, their diverse crews united by a single, burning desire for liberation. Luffy stood at the bow of one vessel, his straw hat catching the wind as his eyes remained fixed on the skull-shaped fortress that loomed ahead like a monument to despair. But where others might have seen an impenetrable stronghold, Luffy saw only another obstacle between him and his friend's freedom. The initial assault on Onigashima's shores erupted in chaos that would have overwhelmed lesser forces. But this alliance had been forged in the fires of shared suffering and tempered by unwavering hope. Luffy moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, his rubber body absorbing attacks that would have felled mountains while his fists delivered justice with each devastating blow. The Beast Pirates, for all their fearsome reputation, found themselves facing something they had never encountered. An enemy who fought not for conquest or glory, but for the simple, profound ideal that people should be free to eat their fill and live without fear. As the battle raged across multiple fronts, Luffy's strategic mind, often underestimated by those who mistook his simplicity for stupidity, began to assert itself. He understood instinctively that this was not a war that could be won through brute force alone, but required the coordination of hearts and minds united in purpose. When he encountered resistance, he didn't simply bulldoze through it, but inspired others to fight alongside him, turning enemies into allies through the sheer force of his conviction that a better world was possible. The journey through Onigashima's labyrinthine interior became a gauntlet that tested every aspect of Luffy's growth as both a fighter and a leader. Each floor climbed represented not just physical progress toward Kaido, but a step deeper into the heart of his own evolution. The beast pirates he encountered along the way served as measuring sticks against which he could gauge how far he had come since those early days of setting sail with nothing but a dream and an unshakable belief in his own destiny. When Luffy finally reached the roof of the Skull Dome and came face to face with not just Kaido but Big Mom as well, the magnitude of what he was attempting became crystalline clear. Two of the four emperors of the sea, beings who had shaped the world's balance of power for decades, stood before him as obstacles to his crew's freedom and his friend's happiness. The rational part of any other person's mind might have counseled retreat, suggested finding another way, or at least waiting for better odds. But Luffy had never been rational in the conventional sense. His logic was the logic of the heart, which insisted that some things were worth any risk. The battle that followed transcended mere physical combat and became something approaching a clash of philosophies made manifest. Kaido, the strongest creature in the world, represented the old order, power as an end unto itself, strength used to dominate and control, the belief that might alone determined right. His every attack carried the weight of decades spent crushing dreams and breaking spirits, turning hope into despair through the simple application of overwhelming force. Against this stood Luffy, whose strength had always come from something deeper than muscle and bone. His attacks carried the weight of every person who had ever believed in him, every friend who had trusted him with their dreams, every stranger who had found hope in his unwavering refusal to accept that the world couldn't be better. When his fists clashed against Kaido's Kanabo, it was freedom itself striking against tyranny, compassion battling cruelty, and the future warring against the past. The introduction of advanced conquerors' haki into their battle elevated the conflict to heights that few beings in the world could even comprehend, let alone participate in. The sky itself split above Onigashima as their wills clashed, creating a rift in the heavens that seemed to symbolize the fundamental break this battle represented in the world's established order. Luffy's mastery of this most advanced form of haki spoke not just to his growing power, but to his evolution as someone worthy of the title he sought, someone whose very presence could command respect and inspire others to greatness. But even as Luffy pushed his abilities to their absolute limits, trading blow for earth-shaking blow with the king of the beasts. The true test came not in matching Kaido's strength, but in outlasting his will. Kaido had grown comfortable in his position as an undefeatable force, finding solace in the certainty that no one could challenge his supremacy. Luffy's refusal to stay down, his ability to rise again and again no matter how devastating the punishment, began to chip away at that certainty like waves against a cliff face. The moment when Luffy's devil fruit revealed its true nature and awakened into Gear 5th represented more than just a power increase. It was the culmination of everything he had learned about leadership, about inspiration, and about the transformative power of joy in the face of despair. The laughter that accompanied this awakening wasn't mere amusement, but something far more profound. The sound of freedom itself breaking through the oppression that had weighed down Wano for so long. In his awakened state, Luffy became something beyond what anyone had imagined possible. His ability to turn his surroundings into rubber was remarkable enough, but the way he wielded this power spoke to a fundamental shift in how he viewed combat itself. Where once his fights had been tests of endurance and determination, now they became expressions of creative joy, demonstrations of the limitless possibilities that existed when someone refused to be bound by conventional thinking. Kaido's confusion at facing this transformed opponent reflected the broader confusion that would ripple across the world as news of this battle spread. The established order had been built on the assumption that power followed predictable patterns, that strength could be measured and categorized, that the strong would always dominate the weak. Luffy's awakening shattered these assumptions, introducing variables that the world's power brokers had never needed to account for. The final exchange between Luffy and Kaido carried weight far beyond the physical devastation it unleashed. When Luffy declared his intention to create a world where his friends could eat as much as they wanted, he wasn't just stating a simple wish, but articulating a vision of abundance and freedom that stood in stark contrast to the scarcity and oppression that had defined Kaido's rule. His final attack, the massive Bajrang Gun that sent Kaido plummeting deep into the earth itself, was powered not just by Haki and Devil Fruit abilities, but by the collective will of everyone who had ever dreamed of a better tomorrow. The moment of Kaido's defeat marked not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era. For 20 years, Wano had groaned under the weight of tyranny, its people forced to subsist on scraps, while their oppressors feasted on abundance. The liberation that followed Luffy's victory was immediate and total. The factories that had poisoned the rivers fell silent. The artificial famine that had plagued the countryside began to lift, and hope, long suppressed, began to bloom like flowers after a long winter. But victory came at a cost that Luffy felt more keenly than any physical wound. The sight of his friends and allies bearing the scars of battle, the knowledge that people had suffered and died to achieve this freedom, weighed heavily on his conscience. He had never sought war for its own sake, had never gloried in destruction even when it served his purposes. The celebration that followed felt simultaneously triumphant and bittersweet, a recognition that even necessary battles left wounds that would take time to heal. The aftermath of the battle saw Luffy grappling with new responsibilities and recognition that he wasn't entirely comfortable accepting. The people of Wano hailed him as a liberator, a hero, a figure of legend come to life. But Luffy had never fought for glory or recognition. He had fought because his friends needed him, because innocent people were suffering, because the alternative was unthinkable. The disconnect between how others viewed his actions and how he understood them created a complexity that would continue to influence his journey. The revelation that he was now considered one of the 4 emperors of the sea carried implications that extended far beyond personal recognition. This title meant that the world government would view him as an even greater threat, that Marines would pursue him with renewed vigor, that other pirates would either seek his alliance or challenge his position. The weight of this responsibility, not just to his crew, but to everyone who would now look to him as a symbol of resistance against oppression, added new dimensions to his understanding of what it meant to be a leader. Momo's growth into both a physical adult and a capable leader represented one of the most satisfying aspects of the Wano victory for Luffy. Watching the boy who had once trembled with fear transform into someone willing to shoulder the burden of an entire nation's future validated Luffy's belief that people could change, could grow beyond their limitations when given the support and encouragement they needed. The tears in Momo's eyes as Luffy prepared to depart spoke to the depth of the bond they had formed, a connection that transcended the temporary nature of their alliance. Yamato's decision to remain in Wano rather than join the Straw Hat Pirates created a moment of profound understanding for Luffy about the nature of dreams and duty. He recognized in Yamato's choice an echo of his own decision to put his friend's needs above his personal desires, to accept responsibility even when it came at personal cost. The respect and understanding that passed between them in that moment spoke to the evolution of Luffy's emotional intelligence, his growing ability to comprehend the complex motivations that drove people's choices. The departure from Wano carried with it a sense of completion that was both satisfying and melancholic. Luffy had achieved what he set out to do. He had defeated Kaido, liberated the country, and ensured that his friends could pursue their own dreams in safety. But the bonds formed during the battle, the relationships built through shared struggle, made leaving difficult in ways he hadn't anticipated. The promise to return, the invitation extended to Momo and the others to join his crew if they ever chose to become pirates, represented his understanding that some connections transcend physical distance. The knowledge that Pluton, one of the ancient weapons, lay hidden beneath Wano's surface, created a new layer of complexity to the world's emerging power structure. Luffy's lack of interest in claiming such a devastating tool spoke to his fundamental character. He had never sought power for its own sake, had never desired weapons that could reshape the world through force. His strength came from inspiring others, from building connections, from proving that there were alternatives to the cycle of violence and oppression that had defined so much of human history. As the Thousand Sunny sailed away from Wano's shores, Luffy stood at the bow, with his face turned toward the horizon, his mind already beginning to focus on the challenges that lay ahead. The defeat of Kaido had been a significant step toward his ultimate goal, but it was only one step among many that would be required to reach Laugh Tale and claim the title of Pirate King. The road ahead promised new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that the world could indeed be changed through the power of friendship and unwavering determination. The impact of the Wano battle would ripple across the world in ways that Luffy was only beginning to understand. News of Kaido's defeat would reach every corner of the globe, inspiring some to hope and others to fear, shifting the balance of power in ways that would influence events for years to come. The world government's response would be swift and severe, their recognition that Luffy now posed an existential threat to their control, leading to new levels of pursuit and persecution. But perhaps the most significant impact of the victory was what it meant for the broader struggle between freedom and oppression that had defined Luffy's journey from the very beginning. The proof that even the strongest creatures could be defeated, that even the most entrenched systems of control could be overthrown, would inspire others to take up the banner of resistance. The dream of a better world, demonstrated to be achievable rather than merely aspirational, would spread like wildfire through the hearts of people who had long ago given up hope. The relationships forged in the crucible of the Wano battle, with Law, with Kid, with the samurai and minks and countless others who had risked everything for the chance at freedom, represented a new model for how change could be achieved in the world, not through the individual pursuit of power, but through collective action, motivated by shared ideals and mutual support. Luffy's role in facilitating these connections, in bringing together disparate groups who might never have cooperated otherwise, demonstrated his evolution from a simple dreamer into someone capable of inspiring movements that transcended his personal ambitions. As the celebration of victory gave way to the quiet contemplation that followed great achievements, Luffy found himself changed by the experience in ways both subtle and profound. The boy, who had once declared his intention to become Pirate King, with the simple confidence of someone who had never truly failed now, carried the weight of understanding what such a title actually meant, not just personal glory, but responsibility for the hopes and dreams of countless others who looked to him as a symbol of what was possible. The future stretched out ahead like an ocean of infinite possibility, marked by islands yet unexplored and adventures yet to be lived. But the lessons learned in Wano about leadership, about sacrifice, about the true cost of freedom, would inform every decision Luffy made as he continued his journey toward the ultimate treasure. The battle for Wano was over, but the larger battle for the kind of world he wanted to create was only beginning, and every victory brought with it new responsibilities that he was finally beginning to understand he was ready to accept. The recognition of Monkey D. Luffy as one of the 4 emperors of the sea marked a fundamental shift in the world's understanding of power itself. Where previous emperors had risen through decades of calculated conquest, brutal suppression of rivals, and the methodical accumulation of territory and influence, Luffy's ascension followed an entirely different pattern. His empire was not built of islands claimed through force, but of hearts won through compassion. His fleet consisted not of subordinates cowed into submission, but of allies who had chosen to follow him because they believed in the world he envisioned. The newspaper headlines that proclaimed his new status rippled across the globe like shockwaves, carrying implications that extended far beyond the simple reshuffling of maritime power. In the halls of Marieshwar, the 5 elders found themselves confronting a threat unlike any they had faced in their centuries of rule. Luffy represented something more dangerous than military might or political ambition. He embodied the possibility that their carefully constructed system of control could be dismantled not through violence, but through the simple act of people choosing to believe in something better. The world government's response was swift and predictable, yet ultimately inadequate to address the true nature of the challenge Luffy posed. Increasing his bounty, mobilizing additional marine forces, and issuing new directives for his capture all followed the established playbook for dealing with threats to global stability. But these measures, effective though they might have been against conventional pirates, failed to account for the unique way Luffy operated. He didn't seek to build an empire that could be attacked, didn't establish bases that could be destroyed, didn't rely on hierarchies that could be disrupted. His strength lay in inspiration, and inspiration, once planted in fertile ground, proved remarkably difficult to uproot. The other emperors watched Luffy's rise with a mixture of curiosity, concern, and calculation that reflected their own understanding of what his success might mean for the delicate balance they had spent years maintaining. Shanks, who had been present at the beginning of Luffy's journey, felt a complex blend of pride and apprehension as he witnessed the boy he had inspired become a man capable of reshaping the world. The straw hat that had once sat upon his own head now crowned someone who carried the potential to fulfill promises that Shanks himself had never quite managed to achieve. Blackbeard's reaction to Luffy's elevation carried a different quality entirely, tinged with the recognition that his carefully laid plans now faced a variable he had not fully accounted for: the methodical pursuit of devil fruit powers, the strategic elimination of rivals, the patient construction of a crew capable of challenging the world's established order. All of these efforts now had to contend with someone whose approach to piracy defied conventional strategic thinking. Luffy's strength didn't come from the accumulation of power, but from his ability to inspire others to discover power within themselves. The continuing mystery of the One Piece took on new dimensions as Luffy drew closer to the final island where Goldie Roger had left his greatest treasure. The 4 road poneglyphs, 3 of which were now within reach of his understanding, held the key to navigating to Laugh Tale and discovering what had driven the previous pirate king to surrender himself to execution, rather than reveal the truth of what he had found. But for Luffy, the journey toward this ultimate goal had become as important as the destination itself, each step revealing new aspects of the world's hidden history and his own connection to forces larger than he had ever imagined. The revelation of his devil fruit's true nature as the Hito Hito no Mi model, Nika cast his entire journey in a different light, suggesting that his path toward becoming Pirate King had been influenced by forces beyond simple chance or determination. The awakening of Gear 5th during his battle with Kaido had demonstrated powers that transcended the conventional understanding of what rubber could accomplish, manifesting abilities that seemed to bend reality itself to the user's will. But rather than feeling burdened by the weight of destiny, Luffy approached this knowledge with the same straightforward acceptance that had always characterized his response to new challenges. The growing network of allies who now looked to him for leadership represented both an incredible asset and a tremendous responsibility. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet, officially 7,000 strong but practically including countless individuals and organizations who had been touched by his influence, created a power base that spanned the globe. Yet Luffy had never sought to command this network in any traditional sense, preferring to trust that those who shared his values would act according to their own judgment when circumstances required action. His relationships with fellow members of the worst generation had evolved from simple rivalry to something more complex and nuanced, reflecting the ways in which shared trials had revealed the fundamental differences in their approaches to pursuing their dreams. Law's strategic mind and Kid's fierce independence complemented Luffy's intuitive leadership in ways that suggested the possibility of cooperation even among those who would ultimately compete for the same prize. The bonds forged through battle at Wano had created a foundation of mutual respect that would influence their interactions, even as their paths diverged toward their separate goals. The Straw Hat Pirates themselves had evolved far beyond the small crew that had first entered the Grand Line with nothing but dreams and determination. Each member had grown not just in strength but in understanding of their role within the larger story that was unfolding around them. Zoro's unwavering loyalty had deepened into something approaching religious devotion, his trust in Luffy's judgment absolute even when the captain's decisions defied conventional wisdom. Nami's navigation skills had become indispensable, not just for reaching their destinations but for understanding the broader currents of change that were reshaping the world's political landscape. Sanji's evolution as both a fighter and a person had been perhaps the most dramatic, his reconciliation with his family's legacy allowing him to embrace aspects of his heritage while remaining true to the values that had always defined him. His experiences in Whole Cake Island had demonstrated that even the most troubled pasts could be overcome when supported by friends who accepted you for who you chose to become rather than who you had been forced to be. The additions of Jinbe and potentially Yamato to the crew represented more than simple increases in fighting power. They brought perspectives and connections that would prove invaluable as the crew prepared for the final stages of their journey. Jinbei's experience as a former warlord and his deep understanding of the world's power structures provided strategic insights that complemented Luffy's intuitive approach to problem solving. His presence also served as a bridge between the Straw Hats and the broader community of fishmen and merfolk, who had their own complicated history with the surface world. The weight of Joy Boy's legacy continued to influence Luffy's understanding of his role in the world's unfolding drama, though he approached this inheritance with characteristic pragmatism rather than reverence. The prophecies and ancient promises that seemed to center around his eventual arrival at certain crucial moments were accepted as interesting coincidences rather than binding obligations. His commitment to freedom extended to his own destiny. He would fulfill whatever role history required of him, but only in his own way and on his own terms. The approaching final war that many observers believed was inevitable carried implications that extended far beyond the simple clash of military forces. The accumulated tensions between the world government and those who opposed its rule, the growing awareness among the general population of the corruption and oppression that characterized the current system, and the emergence of leaders capable of offering alternative visions for the world's future all pointed toward a conflict that would determine the shape of human civilization for generations to come. Luffy's role in this approaching conflict remained uncertain, though his influence was already reshaping the battle lines in ways that few could have predicted. His refusal to think in terms of traditional alliances and enemies created possibilities for cooperation among groups that had historically viewed each other as threats. The Revolutionary Army, led by his father Dragon, the remaining warlords who had their own complicated relationships with the world government, and the various kingdoms and organizations that had been touched by his influence, all represented potential participants in a coalition that could challenge the established order. The question of what would come after victory, should such a coalition prove successful, remained largely unexamined by Luffy himself, whose focus had always been more oriented toward the immediate challenges of protecting his friends and pursuing his dreams. But others who supported his cause had begun to grapple with the practical questions of governance and organization that would arise if the current system were truly overthrown. The model he had demonstrated, leadership through inspiration rather than coercion, strength used to protect rather than dominate, offered a template for how power might be exercised differently in a post-revolutionary world. The treasure that awaited discovery at Laugh-Tale represented more than simple wealth or even the symbolic completion of the greatest treasure hunt in history, based on the fragments of information that had emerged from those few who had encountered Goldie Roger near the end of his life. The One Piece appeared to be something that would fundamentally change anyone who discovered it, providing knowledge or power or insight that would reshape their understanding of the world itself. For someone like Luffy, whose worldview had always been grounded in simple moral certainties, the prospect of such transformation carried both promise and potential peril. The crew's individual dreams, which had always served as the emotional foundation for their journey together, were now approaching the point where achievement seemed genuinely possible rather than merely aspirational. Brook's reunion with Laboon, Chopper's quest to cure all diseases, Usopp's desire to become a brave warrior of the sea. Each of these goals was now supported by the resources and reputation that came with being part of an emperor's crew. But rather than diminishing the significance of these dreams, their approaching realization seemed to deepen the crew's commitment to seeing the journey through to its ultimate conclusion. The world that Luffy would inherit as Pirate King bore little resemblance to the one that had existed when he first set sail from Fuchsia village, with nothing but a small boat and an impossible dream. His actions and those of his allies had disrupted power structures that had seemed immutable, challenged assumptions that had gone unquestioned for centuries, and demonstrated that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be overcome through the combined efforts of people who refused to accept that change was impossible. Standing on the deck of the Thousand Sunny, as it sailed toward whatever adventure awaited beyond the next horizon, Luffy embodied something that the world had rarely seen. Power wielded not for its own sake, but in service of a vision of what life could be like if people were truly free to pursue their dreams. The rubber boy who had once punched a celestial dragon for hurting his friend had become someone whose very existence challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which the world's power structures were built. The final chapters of his story remained unwritten, but the foundation had been laid for a conclusion that would be remembered long after the last wave had crashed against the last shore. And so we reach the present moment in the saga of Monkey D. Luffy, though his story is far from over. From a small boy who declared his dream beneath the shade of a windmill, he has become a force that reshapes the very world around him. Every scar tells a story of protection. Every smile carries the weight of countless lives touched by his unwavering spirit. The rubber boy who ate a devil fruit has grown into something far greater, a symbol of freedom itself, a beacon for those who dare to dream impossible dreams. His journey reminds us that the greatest treasures are not gold or glory, but the bonds we forge and the promises we keep. Rest now, gentle dreamer, and let Luffy's endless optimism carry you into peaceful sleep. Tomorrow brings new adventures, new challenges, and new reasons to believe that even the impossible can become possible when you never stop reaching for your dreams. The Pirate King's journey continues, and somewhere on the vast ocean, freedom sails eternal.